Hello and welcome to Something Rotten, our final episode on The Last of Us Part 2, at least the part of it that we've gamed. It's a little joke for our guest there. I am Jacob Geller. I'm here with Blake Hester. Blake, I assume you spent the last, 3 weeks of your life also playing this game at every given moment because it is so goddamn long. How do you feel that it's over?
I feel alright. You know what? Here's my take. I'm ready to drop this. Not a lot of people will say this, Jacob, but I'm gonna drop it at the top. Fuck the haters. I think this game's alright. I'm into it, and that's how I came out at the end of it. But I'm glad it's over. It is a burden of a game, no matter how much I like it. Just be like, what do I got? 18 hours left to play in a week? A true ball and chain of an interactive experience.
It is. I told my partner Annie when we had left the farmhouse, I was like, just so you know, there is 2 hours left of this game, and she screamed.
Yeah.
She could not contain her frustration without just hollering out loud.
Hey, this podcast is hosted by Hints and Razors, and I'll tell you a part of this game that could have used a good trim.
That's right.
Brought to you by Hints and Razors.
Throughout this series, we have had a number of wonderful guests, and we are continuing that trend today because it's not just Blake and I talking about the end of The Last of Us 2. We are also joined by Cameron Kunzelman of the Ranged Touch podcast network, of which you might know, how much time do you have? Just King Things, Shelved by Genre, Homestuck Made This World, the Fallout one. What is that one called? Cameron, welcome.
The Fallout one, yeah. From tip to top, the Fallout one. Starring them.
Cameron, welcome to Something Rotten. Thank you so much for talking to us.
No problem. How about this game?
How about this game? So I have brought up specifically your thoughts on this game, at least the published thoughts, several times throughout our series, because you have a book that has a chapter on it, The World is Born from Zero. We've talked about a lot. You also wrote for Polygon an essay on how The Last of Us became, quote-unquote, the greatest story ever told in a game. I think those quotes are very important because you are the first to say, not your stance, but kind of the stance of the gaming media writ large, perhaps.
Yeah, people didn't like those quotes, those quote marks. I was at work when that. So the a little behind the curtain on the greatest story ever made. I get an email while I'm like doing my day job, my thing that's not video games in any capacity, and it's like, what do you think about this? And I was like, oh, whatever, like title wise, headline wise. Oh, whatever. And I'm like sitting there 3 hours into some marathon meeting, and I went, oh, people might not pay attention to those quotation marks. Maybe we need to take a rerun at that. Log on to the internet. Yeah, that's true. That was factually correct. But at least the piece is good.
The piece is good.
It's good.
Hopefully it's good. Hopefully people think the piece is good.
Cameron, before we start talking about The Last of Us proper, I do want to ask you, you asked me to nail down the timing of this podcast because today is Farm Day. You said, how's Farm Day? What do you have to do today other than record this podcast?
Farm Day is normally, a day where you just get a bunch of farm stuff done. I got like mow. I need to do some mowing. I need to harvest a bunch of peppers. All my shishito peppers became very spicy. There's like a heat to soil ratio for shishito peppers where they get too hot. I don't know if y'all know this. I don't know if this has come up on this podcast before.
Yeah, it comes up all the
shishito
time.
Peppers can.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So everyone knows. So they've all become hot. So I need to like strip all those off and like let them. Hopefully they'll reflower again before the end of summer. I just harvested all the potatoes.
Can you do anything with those? Can you like pickle them or something? Or are they just kind of a lost cause because they're too hot?
They're just hot. Like I enjoy growing peppers, but I don't like hot peppers. You know what I mean? So it's just a real...
Blake is making a face.
Yeah, it's just like a real gamer's dilemma. You know what I mean? Like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You don't have the joy of completing the pepper. So anyway, doing that stuff, the battery in my car died yesterday. And so now I've actually spent all morning trying to figure that out. Like, what's up with my car battery?
Do you live on a farm, or are you just doing farm things around like your front backyard?
No, I live on a what we call a farm. It is a
Sure.
I'm not incorporated. I'm not getting a farm subsidy. I'm not getting, Uncle Joe's not giving me that corn grant, But no, yeah, we do. It's kind of mostly permaculture farmy kind of stuff. So nut trees and fruit trees and things of that nature. Stone fruit. I mean, I'm in Georgia, so peaches are a thing.
Though this year, much less of a thing, right? As a peach lover, I've been sad and disappointed this year.
A 90% crop loss, I've heard, for peaches in Georgia this year. Same with strawberries. Strawberries got hit like a 70% crop loss, I think. So that, that's just the kind of thoughts I'm having every day, that farm thoughts. But yeah, we, about a year ago, moved to a forested property and started doing that stuff.
That rocks. I've never not lived in just a major metropolitan area, but I have families that are farmers, and I go out there and it's just you can hear your thoughts, which is sometimes not great. Sometimes I don't always appreciate that, but you go out and you see stars for the first time in your life and you're like, this is the life. And then I go back to my 1-bedroom apartment where I hear my neighbors arguing every single night over who God only knows what. And I was like, well,
and you think, God, if I could choose one place to live in the world, it would be a farm out in the middle of nowhere where you could walk through your fields of wheat and gaze up at your pale painted house.
Where the only arguing I would hear would be the internal terrors of my own brain.
Right.
Which I assume is something that you hear anyway, but just in addition to
it's a
everything
real
else
problem.
now.
I'm trying to work through it. Anyway, let's talk.
Here, let me just finish my thought. I recently moved and I inherited 7 chickens from the previous owners. So, we've all got a little bit of farm experience that maybe we'll be able to apply to the game that we played today.
And I've been thinking about moving to Jackson, Wyoming for no specific reason.
Oh, all right. I guess none of this really has much to do with the game, but...
Definitely not.
I've heard it's the only peaceful place in the entire world. So, this section of the podcast, we're going to talk about the end of The Last of Us 2. We ended... Blake, you were so right. Last episode, you were like, if you had watched one more cutscene, it would have been a way better... stopping point. And it would have been because it was just the end of Abby's day 2. And for some reason, I decided that we should stop just before that. But anyway, essentially...
You decided let's stop in the middle of a combat arena.
Look, it's really hard to define 25% marks for this game. I tried my best.
Yeah, you want to pick up with action. You want to come in with action for your final episode, The middle of the combat arena is the perfect place to stop.
That's right. So I got rid of that Rat King. I walked out. I watched a whole cutscene where Mel called Abby a piece of shit.
Okay, does Mel know that Abby and Owen slept together? Because I always thought that's what this cutscene was, but later it cast doubt that she knew specifically that they had slept together. Because Abby comes back and Mel's there, and it's she's not stoked about it, which I feel ruins that moment for me, where the intensity of it is Mel has learned that Abby and Owen have had sex. But I don't know if that's the case.
I feel like she does know and is just doing the compartmentalization required of someone living in the post-apocalypse, where she's like, I'm mad, I'm gonna walk away. Here's the thing, we still all need each other.
Is it weird that Owen doesn't bring it up to Abby afterwards in any of their conversations to be like, oh, by the way, I had to tell Mel about my extramarital affair?
Owen might be the most underwritten and mysterious character I've ever encountered in a video game. He is like a Final Fantasy VI NPC level of just whatever happens he'll react to, but has no internal consistency.
It just feels like that's a missing conversation in this game after Mel has her confrontation with Abby. Is that Owen might be guess what? I kind of had to spill the beans on this.
It kind of feels like Owen is just a guy who is going to be very nice to whoever he is in the room with at that moment. When he's with Mel, he's like, oh yeah, no, our relationship is rock solid. And when he's with Abby, he's like, we don't need Mel, we can just run away. And it doesn't seem like he has kind of maybe the emotional core to be I'm going to hold the same thought at two different times.
Well, there are moments of like he becomes the vehicle for. I mean, he's a plot vehicle. Truly, he is a 2-dimensional guy. He's just there to make things go forward. There's the moment where they're gonna go to the island, and he's like, "I can't let him go alone." And Mel is like, this is not said, but it's like, you're going to leave this one single pregnant person alone here? And like everyone in the room, right? Like, you're sitting at home on your couch screaming, why is this occurring? And it is played so straight, despite the fact that it is objectively, in any form of character logic, a nonsensical statement, right? And that, like, to me, condenses all of his character down to one thing. He just doesn't. I think you're right. He cannot carry a thought from scene to scene.
I also think it's weird that like the game is written in such a way that you never see him and Mel enjoy being together at all. Like it is so clear that he does not, like, frankly give a shit about Mel. Like he's going to have a child with her, but like the game makes no attempt to like create an interesting love triangle. It's just like, yeah, he loves Abby and he's got Mel too. It's like it's a clearly missing part of his character.
Well, but it's because she does not have a character. Mel is truly not a character. She is a weird bummer at the beginning. You know what I mean? Like this one aberrant character at the beginning of the game, and then truly at the end is just pregnant woman number 2. Quite literally. On the call sheet, there is no character there to discuss. It's distressing.
Yeah, I think I was enjoying Owen's. Jacob, I'm sorry, I've derailed
No, go ahead.
This one thing, but like I think in the earlier sections of Abby's levels, I enjoyed Owen a lot more because I enjoyed like getting to watch kind of the arc of Abby and Owen. But the more it hit here, where there were like these very pivotal scenes to the game and to these characters, and I thought more about Owen, I was like, there's a lot missing here, and I think the dynamic between him and Mel is like a huge missed opportunity for this game to deliver but like some pretty pivotal characterization.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what we get with Ellie and Dina and Tommy later can kind of function because we like know who those people are, and it really does feel like with Abby's whole squad, it's like they attempt to kind of do similar character beats, but because we don't know who any of them are, it's like at the beginning of the game, there are 7 people standing in a room killing Joel, and we kind of have to get like 5 minutes with each of those people, and then that's kind of all the game does with them.
And I think sometimes in the moment it works. Like it's like a welcome change of pace for Abby and Manny to be like joking through it after playing Ellie, where shit is just like so dour in the second and third days. But it's like, if you were to ask me anything about Manny, I could tell you he's horny.
He's a horny man, and that's it.
Yeah, and so it's like when you're like playing it second to second, it's like, well, at least it's not like torture porn a lot of the time. But
he's from Mexico. He has a grandfather.
Oh yeah.
I think they talk about food at one point.
He cuts the line to get food.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, and it's part of the thing that this game does, where it's like the acting for all the characters is good, and like their faces look, they have so many expressions and whatever that it's kind of. I remember the first time I watched Netflix's House of Cards, a show that has aged impeccably. You're kind of like fooled into thinking that there is substance there because it was like one of the first times that I had seen a show that was doing like cinematography, that was kind of trying to look like a David Fincher show, and it's like the actors on that show are good, and you have to watch like a season before you figure out like there's nothing happening here, like the show is like an empty bag of chips or whatever. And I feel like I don't think The Last of Us 2 is an empty bag of chips, but like they can get so far just because they have good actors and good facial capture that it kind of takes longer to realize that some characters just don't have anything behind them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a AAA game problem
for sure
in general, where you can throw so much money at the screen and people will like fall over their own feet to give it Game of the Year, but we're not podcasting about every other AAA game.
We do. Actually, Cameron, I have a question. When you're playing games for writing books, what is your process? Like, did you, when you were like, I'm going to write about The Last of Us, do you just play through the whole game again? Or do you watch YouTube like cuts together of the story or whatever. Like how experienced do you feel like you are with these games as a whole, as someone who's like written about them several times?
Yeah. Well, I've thought about this several times, about like process here and compared with other people who write longer work. I think I might be the person with the most published work on The Last of Us, other than people who are like writing news posts about it. I think I've written something like, I don't know, counting my dissertation, because there's a big chunk on The Last of Us in that isn't really published anywhere else. It's similar to the stuff that's in The World is Born from Zero. I probably got like 65,000 words about The Last of Us, like running around in the world. So I've done that. And for most of those pieces, I've replayed either the whole games or a chunk of it. So I've played The Last of Us 1, I don't know, 10 times or something, 9-10 times, a lot. And I replayed it, or replayed 95% of it for the piece that I wrote, whatever, earlier this year, whenever that came out, the Polygon piece. So I replayed a big chunk of it, and that's been a big thing on the Assassin's Creed project that I'm working on. I replayed all those games, and I'm like somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 hours in The Last of Us over the last 2 years, or not The Last of Us, but Assassin's Creed. So I don't know if that is shared with everyone. I talk to other people who write it, especially about kind of really story-heavy games, and I don't know that if everyone does that, but, I've been reviewing video games professionally and unprofessionally before that for a decade. And, like, your ability to make the claim and to make the argument and to make it persuasive, and this is probably like Austin Walker talking in the back of my head, right? But like the way you make those claims persuasive is you do the damn thing, right? Like you're able to talk about the minute piece of evidence that you have, and you create a preponderance of evidence that makes the thing. So that's all to say, yeah, I've played these games a bunch of times. I played The Last of Us Part 2 probably 4 times now. I got about halfway through it for this show. I just couldn't get through
sure.
it. Sure.
Longest game of all time.
Because it's really something in terms of just like the game is entirely fetch quests, right? Like in a way that is like almost lit RPG style, right? Like the only way you understand that the plot is moving forward is the fact that you have to go and do something arbitrary. It's yet another one of those games too, where if like 2 human beings had a conversation with one another, you could, avoid a lot of deep and dire conflict. And I imagine the game is thinking it's a commentary on that. I don't know one way or the other if I think it. But to answer all the way back, I've played these games a lot. I sit and play them again when I write about them. I take really copious and extensive notes. I will refer back to long plays that people do, especially for like reading a cutscene or something like that. And the stuff in The World is Born from Zero is really reading the cinematic image, right? What is this borrowing from other media forms? And so, yeah, people's long plays without commentary are very helpful for just going and checking something, but I also take lots of screenshots. So,
and
yeah.
Do you, a common beat on this show is, in one breath, we are like, man, the things that this game is doing really sucks. Like this, the way that they're depicting women in the Darkness 2 is god awful. And then we're like, we hate to admit it, quad wielding in the Darkness 2 feels pretty damn good. Are you in these repeated playthroughs? I mean, especially of like part 1. Are you able to find joy in the mechanics anymore? Did you at all, or is it entirely just a kind of workplace that you gotta do this in the same way that you have to like transcribe an interview?
Yes, it is entirely. I mean, there's like, if there wasn't something there, I wouldn't be writing about it. You know what I mean? Like, if I didn't think it were a valuable thing to do, there is no value for me in the world, truly, about just destroying the object in front of you, right? Like I and maybe I've written pieces that read that way to people or feel that way, but for the most part, the vast majority of writing that I've ever done is not like, fuck this thing and the horse it rode in on, right? But mostly like, this is a complicated, weird object, and I find something interesting and fascinating about it, or it tells us something about the culture we live in, and so then therefore it's like really worth digging into. I mean, that's my feeling about The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. I don't enjoy them. I don't think that they are like, they express values and they have ideas about what the human is and the human experience is that I don't agree with, and I think are objectively incorrect. And I think in some ways, if you operate from the assumptions that the Last of Us games give you, you are diminishing the character of the human, right? Like, I really do think that way about some of the assumptions made about these games. But, they are mass media objects. You almost can't get bigger than these things, especially post-TV show. And so I think there's deep value in figuring out what are the mechanical ways, what are the visual strategies, what are the cinematic ways, how do they do that stuff? And how do they make a really persuasive claim? The fact that probably the end of The Last of Us Part 1 is the dominant ethical question in video games, truly. The one that is posited the most for people who play games. People feel like they need to have a strong opinion on it. And I think there's a lot of outright dismissal of that moment. And I think in my heart of hearts, I'm also outright dismissive of that moment. But that doesn't mean it's not significant, right? And this is all, I'm repeating cultural studies, this kind of movement from the 80s, in the moment, the 70s and 80s. And what I'm saying right here, I'm just repeating someone else, right? I'm repeating Stuart Hall, I'm repeating Raymond Williams. There's a lot of other people who have said this more and better than I have, but I think it's true. And so to me, there's not a strong to actually answer the question. There is not a strong and fine line between those two things to me, right? Like, the work is the work. And also, I've had to review like a billion video games that I had no interest in one way or the other, but I had to find something interesting to say. And in some ways, you just got to engage with things on their own terms and figure out what they're about and how they do it. I'm kind of an anti-Ebert. I think, like, if you set things up, and I know that y'all are more friendly to Roger Ebert than I am, but like the parameters of what is it trying to do, and does it succeed in trying to do that? I don't agree with that. I think that's like a rejection of judgment, like of our capacity for judgment. But I am an Ebert in the craft is the craft, and you got to figure out what the craft is to talk about the craft. I think he was right in those ways.
Do you think that it's sad that Robert Ebert's death coincided almost perfectly with the release of BioShock Infinite, one of the true video games as art? Moving on.
I try to imagine sometimes Roger Ebert as a interviewer who would interview game developers. And I strongly encourage anyone who wants to have that experience to just go and read early Roger Ebert interviews where he interviews directors that he likes a lot. And then I can imagine a world in a young Roger Ebert in the 1970s interviewing Ken Levine and going, "Oh my God, the Skyhook is the most genius creation of modern storytelling." Like, you could see him saying that. So yeah, I don't know. That's a long. I'm doing a range touch to y'all. I'm sorry, by talking at length about random.
Blake, we all know December is the best month to give gifts.
All right, Hotshot, what you getting me then?
The warm glow of friendship.
You made me play Anatomy. There's no glow left. This is a dying star. Whatever this is, it's done, Jacob.
Okay, how about a lifetime Nebula membership?
Wait, really? A lifetime? That's like 45 years. At the clip I'm going.
Nebula has brought back lifetime memberships for the month of December, and now you can also give them to other people. The link is slightly different for this. It's in the show's description. But imagine it's the day before Christmas or the day before Hanukkah. I don't know when Hanukkah is.
What?
You don't have a gift. Hanukkah is a different date every year, Blake. Imagine that you scramble, but then you buy your loved one a lifetime Nebula membership. Imagine the smile on their face when you tell them they can listen to every episode of Something Rotten early, with tons of bonus episodes and no ads for their whole life.
Now it just feels like you're being sarcastic.
Blake, imagine the affection you'll be showered with when you tell them that they can watch exclusive videos from their favorite Nebula creators like me, Leo Vader, Patrick Willems, Philosophy Tube, and more.
You including yourself in that list?
Yep.
You don't know who I hang out with. I'm just going to buy a Nebula subscription for myself. I don't feel like you're being serious with me right now, Jacob Glynn.
You can do that too. It's $250 for a month, or you could treat yourself to a lifetime subscription.
Okay. What are you actually getting me?
A smile?
Jacob, there's something I noticed about you.
Oh yeah?
You're a very hairy guy. Probably shave pretty frequently, and yet you're not bankrupting yourself on disposable razor cartridges. What gives?
Blake, you are so right. If I shaved with one of those new multi-blade things, or even worse, had one of those subscription services, I'd take probably most of my income keeping my beard in check. But, in fact, I shave with a sponsor of this episode, Henson Razors, and they are genuinely very cool. See, Henson sells a classic safety razor that uses standard blades. Standard razor blades, unlike cartridges, are super cheap and not tied to any proprietary system. Even better, though, is that Henson's razor is designed to be super usable for anyone, no experience required. I had no cuts and smooth cheeks the very first time I shaved with it. It's a classic kind of razor, but engineered with super modern tech. It's the pinnacle of razor evolution, Blake. HensonShaving.com, promo code ROTTEN.
Can I tell you something about me, Jacob? I have not used a razor since I was a teenager.
Is that true?
I use an electric razor. I'm just really good at using those. Yeah, that's all I use.
Blake, here's the thing. I actually use this all of the time. This is a sponsor that I truly believe in. My beard, it looks full, but it just grows this fast. The thing is, you can get a razor and a free pack of 100 blades, which would last, like, years. You can do that all by going to HensonShaving.com and using the promo code ROTTEN.
Was it weirder when Roger Ebert died on the day Bioshock Infinite came out, or that Cormac McCarthy died on the 10-year anniversry of The Last of Us?
Yeah, can you rank the weirdness of deaths of the authors for us?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't know of other like good synchrony. I'm sure someone really great died like the day that Tetris came out. Can we figure that out?
They were killed by Tetris.
I think. Well, it came from the other planet. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's just straight. Did y'all read the new Cormac McCarthy books?
No.
Oh, you should. You should. They're
Yeah.
good. You could turn them into a video game. There's a haunted oil derrick in one of them.
Oh, we got to put some night vision on those.
If we've learned anything since The Last of Us, it's that you can turn Cormac McCarthy novels into video games, and people eat that
and
shit
you don't
up.
lose a beat. Exactly as effective. Okay, let's start talking about what happens in this section, because there is a lot. We wake up in the morning. Essentially, Lev is gone. Lev decides that he needs to go back to his mom on the island, on the Seraphite island, to try to... I guess he's both, wants kind of confirmation that his mom still views him as a person, but also is potentially worried that they are going to do violence to her because she has a trans child, even though she seemingly completely rejects the idea of such. And so we get this part with Abby and Yara going after him to the island. And in this, there's this big sniper set piece where you encounter, if you didn't realize it was Tommy, surprise, it's Tommy. Blake, sniper set piece, good, bad?
Too goddamn long. It's good, but it's so long. It takes forever. Just being like, it's like got that Call of Duty thing where it's like run from car to car and hide until you finally, and it just goes on forever. But it's cool. I mean, it's very cinematic.
It is fun. You're with Manny the whole time, who is the most just labeled for death character, where you're just like, this guy's gonna die the whole time he's there.
Yeah, you're with Manny until you're not with Manny. And then Yara saves the day, which isn't fun because she doesn't get too many moments to come whoop some ass. But yeah, I like this, but like after 15 minutes of it, it's like, I get it. I just want to like get beyond this, which I think is kind of a problem in this whole back section, is like, cool stuff. Why is there another 15 minutes of it? You know, we have somehow made it to part 5 of this series without really talking about the production of this game, which is like just because there has been so much to talk about in every episode. But this section has many parts where I was just like, man, you didn't need to crunch this hard. You know, that they're like, the scale of this game is so big, and it's like, crunch is not exclusively due to how big any game is, but like there are things where it's like you could have cut 20 minutes out of this, presumably thousands of hours of people's lives, and like nothing fundamentally about the game would have been that different. I think you could have cut the entire next level out of the game and maybe had a more a better story.
I have so many notes about that level. I think the best part about the sniper part is we talked about before, Abby reacting to new information wordlessly is often very interesting. And so in the beginning of the game, when she encounters Joel and Tommy and then realizes that they're Joel and Tommy, she has a very good wordless reaction. And in this, where she sees Tommy briefly and then he like falls over the dock, and you see Abby just kind of be like, oh, fuck. Like, you know, realizing who he is a good moment. And then her kind of trying to play it off as like, okay, Yara, let's just keep doing the thing that we're doing. I'm going to try and pretend this doesn't exist right now. But you got to imagine that it's just in the back of her mind the whole time.
I mean, it's something only a studio like Naughty Dog can pull off, which is like cool, is facial acting, right? Like it requires so much money to just animate a face.
Hey, I played LA
to
Noire.
be able. Okay, well, yeah, you know.
Yeah, all you need is volumetric capture. And also the most horrifying crunch conditions
Let me
possible.
back up. You need a studio with the kind of money Naughty Dog and Rockstar have, and the inability to set realistic schedules, etc. But like, it is like a rare game with face acting that goes a lot in the way fucking movies and TV have done for 100 years. But like, there are really good moments in this where other video games would have to write it out that they are able to animate something in the face of a character that says more than words would. There's a great moment with Dina's eyes later in the, like, towards the end of this game where, like, she doesn't say a word and her eyes tell the whole story, which is, like, literally acting 101 for other mediums. But in games is, like, a very rare thing, which I thought was pretty cool.
It is. There's this part that I've been wanting to, or this thing that I've been wanting to talk about in regards to the game's production, which is this thread that Jonathan Cooper, who was previously like a Naughty Dog animator for a long time, did when the game released. Where basically he was kind of talking about Naughty Dog and crunch and conditions and whatever. But basically what he said that I thought was like so fascinating and kind of a peek into how studios like this work is he's like, Naughty Dog has such high standards and can be so awful to work for that they have essentially gone through every game animator that can work to their standards in the industry. Like they have run out of senior people, and so what they're doing is pulling those animators from film. They are getting like CGI VFX people, and he's like, they are really talented. The game looks great, but if this game had like game developers on it, it would have been done a year and a half sooner, you know, which I think is this kind of like fascinating picture. And when you read stuff about like the experience of being a new person at Naughty Dog, people talk about like, I do not know how to hit the quality standards that you are pushing for. And in this, it seems like they are hiring for people who can achieve a certain level of quality even if they do not understand the workflow of making a game, which is why, like, The Last of Us 2 took so long to make, in addition to them reworking plot points and doing all this sort of stuff.
All right, just a thing that I've written about a few times. It's in the book. It's in the Polygon piece I wrote. And I really strongly encourage people, if you're interested in The Last of Us and its production, to go and listen to it. It is the official The Last of Us podcast.
And is this official about the game or the official TV? Because the TV show also had an official podcast,
It's
right?
the same show. It's the same show.
Oh,
I think it's
okay.
all the same, yeah. And so it's like different seasons of the show. And it's hosted, I forget who the host is, but, you know, it's they did a bunch of interviews. They're edited together. It feels like a, you know, kind of it's a DVD special feature. You know, it's that kind of deal. But if you listen to it critically and not just as a, wow, isn't it amazing that the game is made, it is full of just damning information about the thing that you're talking about. And, you know, especially around crunch, there's a point, and I think it's Druckmann who is talking. Someone can listen to this if they want to. And I think he's talking about The Last of Us Part 2. And he says they're in a meeting and someone's pitching a really, really difficult feature. And everyone's kind of kicking it around the table. I don't know if this is possible to do. Here's the reasons why, blank, blank, blank. You know, Naughty Dog famously does not have producers, so you can imagine there's not an intermediary layer here of people trying to figure it out. And it gets around the table, and eventually someone says, well, look, we're Naughty Dog. Like, we're not, that's the thing. And he is telling this anecdote as a way of expressing this is the quality and the character of the studio. right? That like this is the thing. We do this in places that others don't. But if you think about like the standing reserve of labor that you need to blanket say we're Naughty Dog, I think that becomes a really kind of horrifying statement. And that Twitter thread that you're referencing, Jacob, that's not the only time I've heard this, and not even the oldest time that I had been told that. And so I'm not shocked by it. But yeah, you need an industry. The games industry is parasitic on lots of other things by its very nature, is a combination of many media, and so to create itself as a medium, those other industries also have highly depressed labor, and their work is not treated as prestigiously, right? Like if you can work on one single shot for a Marvel film or a Marvel TV show, right, which is kind of hierarchized very low in the prestige of the industry, right? Versus The Last of Us Part 2, pretty easy to make that choice, right? And I wonder if the new The Last of Us project, that multiplayer game with a story element, whatever that actually is, that's been delayed a couple times, I really wonder where it's hitting on that, right? Is this a labor shortage issue? Is this a kind of post-COVID problem? I can imagine this being a spot where the rubber's hitting the road for all of this. But sorry, Blake, I interrupted you.
Well, I was going to say, I just think it's interesting some of the ways the intense visual fidelity, and Jacob, I think we've talked about this off mic a couple times, like how good the game looks actually works against it as a game.
Oh yeah,
in terms of like what's the word I'm trying to say?
Navigating
levels.
Yeah, you want that yellow paint to be everywhere.
I spent so much time, and I don't remember. I guess I would have done this the first time I played it, but I don't remember. I spent so much time in this game looking for where the fuck do I go? And it comes down to everything looks so good that the clear golden path is too obfuscated in a way that like other games would, put yellow paint everywhere. Or just like it would be easier to see because there's not 4 billion leaves on every tree and bush blocking the path. The thing I need to walk up to and press X to shimmy between or whatever. It's weird that like the game is beautiful. Like there's sometimes I'm looking at this game and be like, damn, that's real life for real. I'm playing a movie. But also it comes at the cost of sometimes just being like, well, now I'm stuck in this arena after I've killed everyone for 10 minutes as I walk around like press like a fucking point and click adventure, like pixel hunting the level.
I mean, even the gameplay itself, I felt so like Annie really enjoyed watching me play this and, talked about how it felt like she was watching a, TV show or whatever. But it's like the resource collecting, which is like a fundamental part of the gameplay, is just hugging every wall of every room and like pressing X because like those bottles of pills that are sometimes on the shelves like do not leap out at you because they are painted so realistically within the level that it is this weird thing where you have hyper realistic and like incredibly animated characters running into walls in that video game way because like there might be a part of a blade behind there and you want to find it because that's what the gameplay is telling you to do. And it's especially towards the end when the narrative momentum is really pushing forward. I had a hard time kind of figuring like, should my brain is still saying I need to look all over the place for resources here, and that is such a slow and clunky process because of the just like complete focus on making the game look realistic and beautiful that they have.
Well, speaking of beautiful sections of this game or visually expensive sections of this game, Jacob, let's talk about this damn island. I don't remember. I think the first time I played this game, I had, lots of thoughts on a lot of things. I took more notes about the island than like any other individual section in this game because there's just so much fucking going on there, like story-wise, narratively. I mean, the production is out of control in both positive and negative ways. I think like you'll probably have more than me to say on this. So just where I'm sitting with it is like, I understand what it's doing narratively to tie up some loose ends. I don't think it does it very well. It's just like, remember Isaac? He's dead now. Remember Yara? She's dead now. Here's the end of Lev and Yara's mom's plot line. Never met her, but we have to get this. Anyway, I like the gameplay of it. I think the arenas are huge and fun. And it's as a man who likes expensive things on my TV, I like when the village is burning down. It's like, that looks fucking cool. I don't think this is necessary to the game. I think there is a way to not have this, and it's totally fine.
I mean, my take on it was almost, I mean, so I think this part of the game, when you were first playing it, truly feels like you have stumbled into an Uncharted game. You know, in like, I guess there are multiple parts of the island. There's more traditional, like, sneaking around and, you know, you're shooting people with your crossbow and it feels good. And that's all, like, fine. But I think the memorable parts are, you get on a horse, everything is burning down, you are shooting with a gun while horse riding, your like, things are crashing down behind you, and there is just this scale that is completely absurd compared to the rest of the game. You know, like, the biggest scenes in every other part of the game don't even hold a candle to, like, how much activity is happening all around you, and it feels like a scene from Uncharted 3. You know, like, even there is even an escape the burning building thing that is, like, exactly a scene from Uncharted 3, and I think it is in some ways I like it just because it is so different, and I think it is, and Cameron, I want to talk to you about this, because it feels like it is kind of the game doing its perspective on humanity most explicitly, in that it is like, this is hell, like, the infection is completely absent from here. It is just people killing people, and in the, like, rugged individualism of kind of the game's protagonists, you just start killing everyone from both sides, because, you know, the factions are completely meaningless at this point. They're both trying to kill you, and you just have to get out. And it, I don't know, it is both, I think it is impressive in how, in the scale that it's conveying. Like, I think there is something that comes through in how big it is that would be lost if it was a smaller scene. But at the same time, I think this is the meeting the game on its own terms or not question. Like, I find this section pretty unpleasant in just, like, its ultimate point is like, God, humans are so terrible. Look at them tear each other apart.
It's hard to know what to do with it, right? Because there is a pitting up of, like, political allegiance against religious allegiance that goes on here, right? Like, if we imagine these factions as being kind of linear, right? What are they about, right? Well, the Isaac's faction, you know, the political hardcore, you know, like, Abby's people are going to go away, Owen's going to leave, and all that kind of stuff, right? And so Isaac's faction are all about killing them before they kill us. Like, it's a little unclear what the actual literal motivation here. The Seraphites are making maneuvers in the city, so then therefore they got to be eliminated, I guess, right? You know, big picture. And then the Seraphites, they have, like, this millenarian religious maneuver, right? Like, you got to get rid of the old world to usher in the new, right? And that's even evident in their you know, like, the wooden construction and everything, right? They're really leaning on the, you know, when humans start over after, and by they I mean Naughty Dog here, right? Naughty Dog's leaning on the, when humans start over, we start over from the basics, and that means, you know, kind of like leaning on this indigenous kind of iconography or whatever. And so, you know, you really wonder when you smash them into one another, is this meant to be, or is this kind of being pitched to us as these are two mutually incompatible worldviews that need to eliminate one another? And so that's where the criticism emerges, right? Like, is the game saying that these two things are both insufficient for a full human life? And so then therefore we have to find some mysterious third way. Now the game presents us with a third way that's like murdering those other two factions. I don't know if that's the goal, right? But, you know, the implicit third faction here is Jackson, right? This, like, you know, whatever, like, pseudo ethno state that's, like, running around in the Midwest, or, you know, the Western Midwest, I guess. So it's really confusing to know, like, actually what is the point here? And I think really truly the point is has nothing to do with these actual factions. It has nothing to do with characters as written. I think, Blake, it's exactly what you're saying, that all of the main characters in the game, due to, like, proper prestige storytelling, they need to have a character arc. And I think that this was understood to be the most efficient way to knot a bunch of those together and then resolve them.
And because it's The Last of Us, the resolution is kill most of them.
That's all we've got, right? We'll get to the very end of the game, but the very end of the game doesn't even have the self-respect to be ashamed of itself, right? Like there's a very oddness to it that it commits to this bit that we're talking about all the way through.
I do think that we, the very obvious read on it, but we should say is like game about cycles of violence, and we are seeing that, of course, it ends in everyone dying. I also think the weird, we've got like the modern fascists versus the new religious sect or whatever. There is also obviously the what we've been talking about throughout this whole series, the kind of Israeli politics of it, where in many ways the Seraphites are, I don't want to say the Seraphites are the Palestinians, but it certainly, seems that way in a lot of their coding. And again, the kind of like complete nihilism of the message and the kind of like somewhat apathy of the cycle of violence theme is like they're just both gonna kill each other. Like how horrible is it that like at the end of the day they're all going to kill each other, which I think is a perspective that ignores kind of the different weights that the factions have. The fact that the WLF is like a fully functioning fascist military organization, and the the Seraphites live on an island, and mostly keep them themselves. It's perhaps kind of an unconscious representation, but it's like it's hard to see it and be like, I guess this is where we were going all along. This is where hate has brought us to. But I think that's kind of, seeing two forces crash into each other is happening large here, when of course the story is seeing those two forces in Abby and Ellie crash into each other.
It's interesting, this section, and then considering like Jackson and Ellie and Dina, where they go after this, and like Abby, honestly everyone, kind of a lot of the central characters' main goal is like in this Abby section, like obviously such lengths are taken to like humanize the fascists, the WLFs, these military extremists, and the same grace is like not extended to the Seraphites. I mean, it's like, like you get the moments of Lev explaining why their religion is important to him, and like that's about it. But there's also the dissonance of Abby going to the island with Yara, and Abby just starts killing everyone, and it's like narratively I don't think Yara would be super on board with this, but she doesn't say anything about it. You just start murdering, and she's like, damn, all right, cool stuff. And yet like the solution for all these people seems to just be to like leave their community and abandon that. Like even Abby or Ellie and Dina leave Jackson, which ostensibly is like, granted it has like there's bigotry there, but it's like you have to imagine to some degree in this post-apocalyptic world in the fiction safer than this ranch home where they just have some barbed wire and a fence, which I think is, saying a lot in beyond the narrative of the game. But also like Owen's thing is like, let me abandon my community. Then Abby's like, let me abandon my community. Everyone is like, what if we left everything and moved away from it? And I don't understand like why that seems to be the central solution of the game for everyone. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's entirely, I think it is working backward from plot necessity, like really and truly. It doesn't read to me, because the way it all folds back together, and I guess we're going to work our way to this, right? But it works its way to this like completely buffoonish coda, right? Of like, no one learned anything. No one learned a single damn thing about anything. And more importantly, no one learned anything from the last 20 hours of gameplay, and there's worse people out there than even these other people, right? Like, you have to create, like, in a world where humans have free will, there's got to be Satan, right? Like, there has to be this, like, almost universal, because are they actually positioned as white nationalists, or are they just preppers? Big quotation.
No, they're the evil greasers. That's
They are in fact evil greasers. But right, like there's something about that to it too, right? That like everything you just said about the kind of complexity of lived life that these characters theoretically have, right? You know, why would it be okay for you to kill Yara's next door neighbor, right? Like, and with no kind of repercussion. Well, that's because the plot's got to like get us to this Gordian knot that we can just cut really easily and then get to that boss battle. It does not feel to me like it is worked backward from what do these things mean. It really feels like it is. These are characters, and we have drawn some like Kurt Vonnegut ass, you know, like string charts on the wall. And we figured out where they are crossing to give some, you know, HBO 10 episodes miniseries qualities to them, right? Like, it's all downstream from Prestige TV to me.
It's so strange. I don't know if I'm just, like, reading too far into it at this point, but, like, obviously, I think you have to decouple, like, you know, Isaac, and these are, like, people who kill, and blah, 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 blah. But, like, Abby's community in the Seahawks Stadium, like, if you forget the part of the game where everyone is a violent psychopath, like, it seems like the best bet you have in this world. Like, you get to see it, and it's like, there are farms, everyone has their own apartments and press boxes. Like, it is a functioning, pleasant society that I don't understand, like, when you decouple that just from, like, the Isaac shit going on, like, why this game is so obsessed with people leaving the safety they have, you know?
I feel like it is ironic in how many mechanical ways the game kind of tries to give personhood to the people you're fighting. You know, that they animate realistically, and they yell each other's names, and they die horribly like a real person would. But ultimately, like, the game is so concerned with its like 6 major characters that kind of no one is allowed to exist outside of that. Like, I think the point of the Abby story is like, we only have each other, and it's not, you know, like, it's those lines can't be defined by the factions we're a part of. We just need to, you know, care for each other because that's what we do. But it's like, for that point to be expressed, the game has to show Abby killing a whole bunch of WLF, and it has to show Lev killing Seraphites, and it has to show Yara, you know, killing people. It just kind of like, it removes their ability to have anyone except for the main characters in the game, because those are the only people who kind of like have personalities and legacies that matter.
It also seems coded in the idea of, like, you know, when people left all the cities and moved to the suburbs because the idea that it was safer.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And we've talked about Yusuf's piece.
Yeah.
But we should talk about it again.
Well, and Jane Jacobs, I'm reading one of her books right now. She talks about the lack of eyes in, you know, like how many eyes you have in a busy city versus the suburbs or like these gated communities they build in cities. And it's like, well, actually the busy part is technically safer because more people are watching. And this game is obsessed with this idea of like, got to get out of the dangerous city, you know?
Yep.
And it's like, what about your home was actually dangerous, Abby? Granted, you lived a dangerous life because you chose to be a part of the army, and that's its own troubling thing. But it's like, your life could have been very safe, but instead your solution is like, I just got to get away to, and then where you land is ultimately way worse for you immediately because it's like there's no safety net there.
Well, yeah, there's like a very weird. The game, you know, kind of eats itself in some ways because it begins with the exact opposite of what you were just talking about, Jacob, right? Which is like, did you know, actually, that all the characters who didn't have names in the first game, they had families?
Right.
That doctor had a family, right? Like, the narrative seed of the second game is, in fact, all these people that seemingly don't matter a whole lot. Like, in fact, they matter so much they're gonna kill your dude, right? They're gonna come kill your dad, right? Like, you know, the ultimate gamer dad. They're gonna, you know, hit him with the ultimate dad tool, the golf club.
That's God, the brutal irony.
Yeah, they're you know, that's the Naughty Dog touch. But so it begins from that place, right? But I think you're exactly right, and there's I think there's something going on here with the only way the games can imagine being yourself, going back to some of the stuff you've been talking about, like the only way the game can imagine, it's not just even rugged individualism, right? It's action in the world. And the lexicon of actions in this are hitting the triangle button to interact with literally anything and everything, depending on a context-dependent thing, or using the other 13 buttons on the controller to murder people, right? Like, those are the two mechanisms. As far as I can remember, you can't even melee through a window, right? You have to shoot a window out? You can? Can you like
punch a
tickle
window out? Yeah.
Okay, good. I just couldn't. I was like, I was playing it earlier today, and I was like, maybe can I only throw a brick through? So there's the game sets itself up to think through these things pretty intently, and then just completely abandons it, for reasons that are mysterious to me. And again, I think because supposedly characters driving the plot, but it forgets about character in pursuit of set piece, right? In pursuit of uncharted thrill. And then when when that is driving the bus, everything else becomes secondary to it.
I think ultimately, I still really like this game. I'm going to take it to my grave. I think this section specifically is where like a lot of this shit starts really coming to a head for me, and I have a lot of problems. Like sometimes it's not even thematically. Sometimes it's just like narratively, it's messy. Like, why does Abby kill so many Seraphites in front of Yara and she say nothing? Like, for a game that is must have 800 pages of incidental dialogue while you're walking from A to B, it's very strange to me that in this back section that is not commented upon at all. And I think, like, realistically, these are problems throughout the entire game that was probably easier for me to just overlook. But there's, like, so much of it stacks up here that I'm like, the game is too big and you're starting to not be able to keep it coherent. Like you have created something too massive for you to be able to write through it.
I want to talk about a very strange part at the end of this, which is the kind of boss fight to culminate this section is this melee fight where Abby is fighting a huge Seraphite guy. And it is essentially a preview of the final fight that we're going to have between Ellie and Abby, but it is fully Naughty Dog showing off their gore system where like Ellie, or Abby, excuse me, hooks a scythe or whatever she's holding in the guy's mouth and tears it open, and he is Joker-fied and keeps kind of fighting past the point of, all kind of logic and rationality. And I think my guess is that the idea with this boss fight is to really be like the most obvious humans zombies story thing, which is like humans are the real monsters, in that like this character who is ostensibly not infected plays almost exactly the same as like a bloater boss fight or whatever, that it is just this knockdown drag out fight. I think it is way too much. It just feels not in the, like, it's so over the top that it kind of breaks the seriousness of the game. And it is also another example of in a slightly different way than it treats its other black characters, the idea of this being like the human has been completely transformed into an unthinking monster to be like a huge black guy is, I think, the game just being very careless with its kind of racial theming once again.
Yeah, I'm very curious about where this entered into the game, right? Like, was this always playing like, oh, it's the end of a big segment, we gotta have a big boss fight, right? Or was this because it comes out of nowhere, truly. It doesn't feel, and it breaks the pacing of the segment because there is more escape stuff that happens right after that, or getting to the boat, right? It feels like it is let's press pause, go do this other like racially weird thing, and then come back. And I do wonder, I think, I'm on the same page as you, Blake. Like, I am very positive on the game up until basically the island, and then I think like it hits a brick wall. I think the last 6 hours of this game are very bad. But I do wonder if this boss battle weren't here, I think I would be more positive on the island, because it would be a theoretically stealth and story, and we went to this place and we saw people completing a different conflict that we are not involved in, and then we made it out, and isn't this horrible, right? Like, it would turn Abby into a witness more than a active combatant, right? And I think it would be even better to have it be a no-kill set of levels, right? Or at least pieces of it, right? Like, I think that would have changed the gameplay in a sufficient way. I can also imagine some playtesters running into that and there being a lot of friction, right? Like, why is the toolkit that I have developed 20 hours of expertise in, why is it not helpful here? And why did I do all this and not have a big cool fight at the end? And so that really to me is a place where what it is trying to do as a kind of prestige entertainment product just runs straight into the fact that this is the studio that makes Uncharted games,
And there's a line from Jonathan Cooper where he talks about, he's like, these Sony AAA games just have the pockets to fund infinite delays and infinite player testing, and like that is kind of how they turn out so good. Like that's how you get the 10 out of 10 God of Wars and whatever. And so it feels very real to think about them being like, well, what was like the finale of the island, and then them being like, we got to put a boss here. We also haven't talked about the fact that this game had like huge rewrites because they didn't specifically say it, but they essentially said like parts of the narrative weren't resounding with players, and they said they weren't fond of characters the writers hoped would be likable, which is a wild thing to hear given the reception of this game. But like the idea of it being delayed years because characters weren't resounding with the players enough, and I really am very curious what that would have looked like, if they needed to flesh out Abby way more, or if they needed to give Ellie more. I assume it was Abby, but maybe that's just because I'm reacting to the way that people have talked about this game for the past 3 years.
Listeners, please send us your tier list for likability for the characters in the game. We're curious.
Oh, we've already done one, but Blake has already listed them all.
You got Abby, Lev, Owen. Sorry, plot twist there. I love Owen. He's such a fun Beavis and Butthead character.
Yara, right?
Oh, Yara. Yara is nothing.
Yeah, we don't even talk about what happened to Yara.
Yara is truly nothing in this game, and you learn that when they kill her, and then no one even stops to mourn her. I mean, Lev is like, oh no, but that's about it.
No, but it's like, mourning is a long process, but Lev doesn't even get to show grief. It's like when Abby shows up and she finds Owen and Mel dead, she gets to have, I have written down, ask Blake about puke, which is something that I want to talk about.
Yes, sir.
But
yes, sir.
But it's like Lev, we barely get to see react to the death of Yara, and also Annie looked at her phone for 1 second and looked back up and was like, wait, Yara's dead?
Yeah.
And it was like, that is how fast it happened.
Yara is nothing in this game. And it's unfortunate because it seems like there is an interesting relationship to explore between Yara and Lev, and then the introduction of Abby to Yara and Lev. But instead, it's like Yara's got to get her arm cut off, so she's going to be gone for a while. And then when you finally get to hang out with her, you murder everyone she's ever known, and she's just like, chill, cool with me. And then she dies. As like she's nothing. So she's unfortunately not on the tier list, but she had the potential to be there. Dina actually is number 1, then Abby, Lev, Owen. That's how it goes.
We got the S tier, A tier. Okay. So we escape from the island, rowing in a boat away. Something to be said about the use of boats in this game, maybe. I was always struck by the idea of the main menu being a boat is weird. And I also always just think about God of War 2018 and being like, I guess Sony's thing is boats. They're a big AAA
and they've
thing.
Never been fun.
They did. Yeah.
They're so not fun.
Yeah. They did user testing in 2016, and people said, we want boats.
We need boats.
In the same way that they said, we want Vikings back then, and it was the next decade of our lives.
We are still living out the consequences.
2016 was a great year for boats, though. We all remember. Huge year.
Was it?
Big boat.
Nah, I'm just kind of saying shit.
Oh, I was thinking of the, I briefly thought the Suez Canal thing. I was like, that couldn't have happened in 2016. No, that happened a year and a half ago. Okay, so we finally get back to the aquarium. I was thinking, thank God they didn't make me like fight infected between these moments. The small mercies of the game, just letting the cutscenes happen in a row.
Is it weird when Abby gets back to the aquarium that she doesn't try to find a normal way into her lover's house and she just breaks a bunch of windows?
Look, we got a button for break window. We gotta use it.
She just starts destroying windows, and I'm like, all right, I guess that's how we do it.
God, imagine how hard replacing a window would be in the apocalypse.
You couldn't.
It'd be a fucking nightmare.
You could never do it.
I mean, it's like being a cobbler in the post-apocalypse, right? Like, you have become, so if you're a glazier, you're the most powerful person on the planet, right? If you can repair a shoe and you can repair a window, you're employed the rest of your life. You have a guild now, you know what I mean? Like, Start jump-starting your own economy.
Is it weird that in the 20 years since The Last of Us apocalypse happened, not since the game was released, nobody panic, it's only been 10 years, the games have never explored much of people creating their own shit? It's still like...
But we talked about this last time. They have no culture. Ellie is like, I was born in the wrong time. Yeah. And it was like, I guess, because no one has made art in the past 20 years.
Yeah, it's very weird that it's like, they're still just wearing... I mean, the Seraphites maybe are different in this case, but like, it's weird that it's like, everyone's just like, oh, we'll just go find some clothes.
Ellie just wears Chucks and jeans, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, one day all that will be gone or something rotten on your feet. It's weird that they've never been like, oh, we sew our own clothes here in the Last of Us world. Nevertheless,
they make beef jerky. What more do you want? That's explicitly stated more than one time in the game. That yes, there's a joke that happens early. That's like when Ellie first got to Jackson, she was stealing beef jerky because she was like, so like, what if we have to leave, whatever, right? And it's like that is the first moment that I can think of in the game where like no one's making cowboy hats. Yeah. They have horses and cattle, right? Maybe we don't see cattle.
But they have bars in Jackson, so they must be brewing beer. So like, did they make the equipment?
We see a guy growing weed. That's something,
yeah, right? But he's the only guy. He's the weed guy.
Yes, for the whole world. I think it speaks to kind of the prepper fantasy, where it's like, hey, we got 1 million rounds of ammunition and we know how to make beef jerky. That's all you need to know for the apocalypse. Don't need to know how to filter water or like mend a hole in your jeans. But if you can make beef jerky and shoot a gun, you'll be fine.
Or learn to make guitar strings. Why do you have to go into an infected zone to find a 30-year-old pair of guitar strings? Like, couldn't you just learn to make some nylon strings or some shit? Like, there's no ingenuity in this world. There's just rely on old shit, point, shoot. That's the whole thing.
There's plenty of ingenuity. I mean, this is also like the terrible heart of the game revealing itself. There's plenty of ingenuity if you want to make a silencer for a gun, or if you want to service your weapon, right? Like
you can make the Max Payne 3 silencer,
right? There like actually is a pretty robust imaginary for like being scrappy and scroungy and building your own stuff. It's just shit that's like
a proximity bomb,
right? It's just like things that are truly horrifying to imagine, right? Like just learn how to build a big fence, right? I mean, I guess Jackson does know how to do that. They do have the.
But it seems like no one builds new houses. They just live in old houses.
Oh, of course not. No, only old houses.
Yeah, it's so
well, except for the Seraphites. They've got they have lean-tos.
That's true.
Okay. So we get to the aquarium. Those people are dead. Blake, you mentioned in the previous episode how like Abby's plotline is so disconnected from Ellie, and basically the events that are going on in the world are so disparate. And I do think that it's actually fairly effective to have Abby escape this enormous military operation, and she comes back and like for a completely different and uncontrollable reason, two people that she cares about are just dead, and it really highlights the cruelty of what Ellie is doing, which is like completely removed from anything else. Ellie is just going around like killing the people that Abby cares about, and it I don't know, it sucks to watch, and Abby barfs. Like you said something about The Last of Us barf like early in this series.
It's the greatest video game barf of all time. No vomit has ever looked as good as this vomit does. This vomit probably cost $600,000. It's unbelievable.
The Naughty Dog artist just looking at pictures of vomit for weeks on end.
Dude, it's unbelievable. Like, it's such a specific vomit, too, because Abby probably doesn't have much in her stomach, so it's not like pea green exorcist vomit. It's like just a watery, quick vomit. Like, so much thought went into this puke, and every time I see it, I'm like, that's crazy that they put that much into this puke. I love it. It's my favorite moment of the damn game. Jacob, finally, This podcast is improving my miserable life.
Oh, you're finding value in the work? You like these games that we've been playing?
No, of course not. We play terrible games. I just actually got to try the sponsorship we've been talking about. I got a Henson razor.
Oh, yes, sir. Last razor you'll ever need.
Truly, it is amazing. I like it so much, I've just started shaving all over my body. My arms, my eyebrows, my legs, everything. I am smooth as a baby's bum, baby boy. And dear listener, you too can experience this bliss if you just go to hensonshaving.com and use the promo code ROTTEN.
You gonna use this razor to shave your head like Max Payne now?
All I'm saying is if Max Payne had a Henson razor, he would not have looked so damn patchy. That's hensonshaving.com, promo code ROTTEN. Friend of the show, vomit.
One thing that I noticed on this that I did not really think much of last time is how tremendously sad it is that Abby is there mourning her two friends, and Lev picks up the map that Ellie has been using to kill everyone and is like, hey, looks like she's here. And it is, I imagine an intentional, roping of Lev into the quote-unquote cycle of violence, but the game also seems like it wants Lev to be kind of the one hope for the future, and is just, so awful that he's like, hey, Abby, do you want to go kill the people who killed these people? Because I know where they are. I found this map. Let's go.
Also, it's dumb that the map's there.
Yep.
Yeah. Wait, how many things has Ellie done and not dropped this map? And not disposed of this map? It is a pure contrivance.
So we go back to the theater. We see the same scene from another perspective. It is pretty wild how long we have gone without seeing Ellie, just in terms of kind of story construction, that when you start hearing Ashley Johnson deliver lines again, you're just like, oh yeah, I was with her for 15 hours. And you do this, I don't know, what Cameron, what do you feel about this boss fight where you are Abby and you fight Ellie, and Ellie is kind of doing the things she does when you play as Ellie?
I think that's when they pitched this in the room, everyone was like, oh, yeah! To me, it feels like playing, because I didn't replay the end of this game for the thing. I watched a very nice long play for it, but I did play the first 10 or 12 hours of the game. And so watching it was really interesting. And then looking back at my notes from when I had a review copy of the game, that was interesting to go back and compare, how did I feel in the moment of playing it? There's two ways to do this. There's the way that they chose to do it, which is a little bit of a looser version of it, because there's a lot of ways to kind of cheese this, right? You can just smash her in the face with a brick from around the corner and kind of rush her. That's one way of initiating these, because they are very much come into contact, trigger the next part of the fight, right? It's
yep.
very...
It's just a 3-phase. It's almost the same as the David fight in The Last of Us 1, except Ellie's a little more active while you're fighting her.
And I was thinking, what are other ways of doing this? And I was thinking, the Mr. Freeze fight from Batman Arkham Asylum, right? Which has you going around and you have to interact with these 8 or so hot spots that do different things to him, and you have to interact with it. And I think this is the more linear, more friendly version of doing that. But I did wish it was a little bit more of not just you're doing to her what she does to other people, which is not is I guess fun in the moment to do and to experience, but I don't know that this would never rank for me highly above other versions of this or other kind of boss battles in games, because there's not having to think outside of the relationship, right? It's just go do the thing that you've been doing before and hear the lines from the other side. And so on one hand, it's such a brilliant idea, but I think there's a lot of cool stuff that's squandered here. I don't know. I can see where the ceiling is, and it's not here.
How would you feel about this boss fight?
I ain't got anything smart to say about it. I think it sucks. It's not fun. I put this fight on easy, got through it, then put the game back up to normal. I have always hated this moment. It feels gamey and unfair in a way that is just very goofy to me. I also think the animations of Ellie look fucking stupid. She's running around crouched like a little goblin the whole time.
It is
Yes.
it is totally that thing of when you are playing a first person game and then someone like hacks a camera in third person and you see what they look like crouch running and it's like, oh no, we weren't supposed to see this.
The gamey part of it, just to follow up on that really quick, is it gets so much worse, I guess, in the second stage where you go into the loudest room. You literally go to the china shop, right, where it's like chains dangling from the ceiling. There's
It's the new
cans,
Gyarados fight in Resident Evil 4. It's exactly that.
Right?
Yeah, I hate it. I think it sucks so much.
I agree, Cameron, that I think it is, when they stumbled upon this idea, it must have felt very cool, and it's like, hey, she uses the traps that you've used in the past, and so it's like, she's got her old tools, but it's just, it is essentially a quick time event made into a place where I like accidentally game overed a bunch of times by walking into a mine, which, whatever. But the fight ends. There is a just wild series of violent acts that happen on screen. Where I mean, it's like this is the kind of the fact that everyone walks away and is like basically fine from this fight physically when they have been arms broken, stabbed with like rusty knives, all of this stuff. It's very horrible. There's a part where gosh, what is the sequence? It is Abby is killing Ellie. Dina runs out, grabs Abby. Lev shoots someone. Who does Lev shoot? Lev shoots Dina. Abby smashes Dina's face into the ground in, I think, the single most upsetting instance of violence in the game, and it is, I almost say that positively. I mean, this is the something rotten thing. It is like, even after a game full of violence, seeing that happen is so awful and just for some reason feels outside the scope of the violence that the game has been doing otherwise, that it is, I think they're trying to sell how horrible the fight is, and it does, in that you are just screaming, stop, stop, stop. By the end of it, Abby almost kills Dina. Ellie says she's pregnant. Abby says good. And then Lev stops her from killing Dina. There's a lot. It's a very rapid sequence of events that does kind of feel like their ultimate confluence of all of these people's legacies of violence coming together at the same time. And then the game doesn't end there. If it had, would this be a satisfying ending of Abby saying, never let me see you again and walking out the door? Like, would that be better, or would we be left? It still doesn't really express a character arc for people.
I think you end it with the next scene. Abby, or not Abby, but Gina and Ellie at the farmstead, got the baby. We do some good old-fashioned Red Dead Redemption, like you got what you wanted, right? Like everything's good. You didn't get the final, kill that you wanted there, but now you have a domestic life and you were left with the repercussions of your actions, right? Like, cut in on her face, have her fingers cut off here, right? In a knife fight. Give us the actual final shot of the game. Game ends here is infinitely better. I really and truly believe that.
I think it could end at the farmstead, and that would be good. I also think there's a way to end it in Santa Barbara without the Ellie Abby fight. Like, still get them together, and then we'll talk about it when we get there, but like, don't do the fight. I think that's also an ending that would be better than ending with a Tekken 8, 1v1 that we get. But
I think you mean the end of Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah.
I wrote that down. Noah
Right.
Caldwell Gervais specifically references in this video.
Oh, really?
Yeah, of injecting each other with adrenaline so they can keep fighting.
I do think, though, ending at the scene we're talking about would not be the right call. I think there are definitely other ways it should have ended, but not here.
Yeah, you need a cap on it, and I don't think there's a way, like, truly, and the game never figures it out either. There's no actual way to end Abby's arc, right? Like, the game never figures out how to do that. The ending that we have is literally she just wanders off screen, right? Like, and so it's not as if that's not even a pretense in this game that you should do it. If there is an ending of it, it's what the start menu looks like after you complete the game, right? That's the best gesture we have.
Which that start menu makes me more emotional than like many other aspects of the ending. Like, I think that menu is very effective. But yeah, so we have, I don't know, it is very finale-esque, this moment. It does very much seem like it is what the entire game has been building to. And then we go into this farm section, which is, I think a very good way of talking about it is the John Marston on the farm, herding sheep, doing his shit. I think it very intentionally feels fake, just like in like a constructed sense. Like that sunset the first time you're out there is just so like impossibly beautiful, and I mean that in like it just seems like a hallucination, and I think we're supposed to feel like it's a hallucination, and it kind of gets back to Naughty Dog style writing where they're having fun, they're dancing together. They have a baby. It's like Jesse and Dina's baby. And then there are some trauma flashbacks. Blake, do you like this section as a whole, and do the flashbacks like work for you?
Yeah, I do like this section, though we'll talk about why when we get to Tommy's return. The flashbacks I think are interesting. Not the least of which is just mechanically how they work. I'm not a game developer, and I wouldn't presume to be one. But the cutscenes in this game are in-engine, running in real time, and they are able to do like quick second flashes of a moment in the game that does not take place here, which I find just technically unbelievable. Like, literally, I know the billionth of a percent about how to make a game. And even I look at this and I'm like, how the fuck did they do that? That you can flash Joel's face on screen and it all be running in real time. I know that's not really answering your question, but every time I see it, I am taken by it.
No, but I wrote down the same thing, and Naughty Dog has talked like weirdly a lot about how like new generations mean they don't have to do that split second cut to black before cutscenes start, and sometimes it feels kind of silly, like, hey, that's what you're so concerned about, this like millisecond of black. But in a scene like this, it really matters. Like if that happened when like the rake falls over and Ellie sees Joel's face, I don't think it would be as effective. And also that they then set up, like there's another scene where a broom falls over and you like tense up because you're expecting it and it doesn't happen, which I do think is another very good putting you in the head of Ellie moment. Cameron, in your version of the ending of the game, I assume these still exist in some way?
Yeah, I just don't like, fundamentally the game for both characters does not really resolve any of this, right? It is resolved in, well, I guess all this happened, right? And like, maybe we've learned a lesson about it, maybe we haven't, I don't know. But it doesn't, there's no neat closure for the actual end of the game. And I think you can have a very unneat closure, but even better, I think that this will be with Ellie. She will now live a fairly normal life, theoretically, if there's no part 3, right? She will live a theoretically normal life that will be haunted every moment by all the things that we did as players, right? That we like got some thrills on. And that's, I think, a common theme amongst some of the Something Rotten games too, right? That, there's this little bit of like, no, you naughty boys, right? Playing these games, right? That's not a thing that was unique to Spec Ops, right? Especially in that generation of games, even though I think our public memory of that is such. And so, yeah.
that was the only game that ever inspected violence.
Right. Or even like, did some wink, not nudge about it. But so I think you can do it. I think you can have all of that. I think what comes next is, I don't know, maybe this is a playtest thing and they needed a big final fight that went the other way, right? Like maybe players really felt that Ellie is the core of the game and needs to one up the other person. Maybe that's it. Maybe it is just so crass and simple as that. I think the other thing is that there's a really positive ambiguity that is here that I think would probably rub people the wrong way. And what we get at the end of the game is a very negative ambiguity, but one under which someone gets to cry in close up. And so then therefore, like we've had our moment of, wow, didn't we see what hath man wrought? Wow. I'm very negative on that final scene, but yeah, I think so. I think all this would still be in there. I think it would work even better. Just, go with the no fingers thing, keep the guitar playing. There's a gap in your life. I mean, it's the most heavy-handed metaphor to be hit in the head with, but we're playing The Last of Us, right? Like that's not out of bounds.
I know, Blake, I want to let you talk about Tommy. I just want to, just before that, speaking of heavy-handed, I want to mention Andrew Wyeth here because, my God, this entire scene, like the whole environment is constructed to essentially look like Christina's World, the painting by Andrew Wyeth, which is, I'm sure listeners, you have seen it. It is a woman kind of laying at the foot of a hill looking up towards a farmhouse. There's like wheat in it. If you go to the Christina's World Wikipedia page, The Last of Us 2 is one of like 3 media things that it references. It's like it also inspired a final level of The Last of Us 2, which is a fascinating painting that I don't want to divert too much time to, but like the very short version of it is Andrew Wyeth was friends with this woman, the titular Christina, who had like a degenerative disease where she was essentially paralyzed from the waist down, or like did not have control of her legs, and also refused to use a wheelchair, and so would just kind of crawl places, and so I think in some ways the Wyeth version of this painting is like, oh wow, look at like her agency. This is her world. She's looking up at her farm, but the picture is so kind of melancholy and gray that I think a lot of people see it and feel this sense of like yearning and kind of like a world apart, that like you're not able to reach or whatever. And I assume that is basically what The Last of Us usage of this is going for, is that kind of like sense of yearning. It is also just like a indelible piece of Americana, like it is one of the most famous paintings of the past 200 years or whatever, and this scene seems so invested in making this scene be the kind of prototypical American dream circa like the 1800s, of owning your own land and being able to subsistence farm and not being reliant on anyone. It is very heavy-handed, but I do think just visually it works for me just because I do find that painting so beautiful that I think it's interesting that they're paralleling it. Blake, talk about Tommy.
So you're living your great life, but with PTSD. But Tommy shows up, and he's, I guess up to this point, you would have thought he was actually dead. So it's kind of a...
Yeah, he gets shot in the head in that cutscene.
Bit of a surprise moment here. Tommy shows up. He is clearly not the same. I mean, physically, he is, disabled, blind in one eye. Maria, him and his...
I think just
Maria.
Yeah, Maria and him have split up. Tommy says it's a mutual thing, but you can hear in his voice it clearly was not. And the game leads us to believe it is because of the very reason he has showed up here, which is he's not been able to let Abby go. And I think slightly different than Ellie up to this point, he is still hell-bent on revenge. I don't know, at least it's not explicit to this point that Ellie still wants to go out there. She will obviously change her mind and will go out there, but like Tommy shows up and he's like, hey, I've talked to someone, they traded with Abby, she's here in Southern California. And Ellie's like, nah dude, I got a life, I left the city. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't do this. Dina explodes on him and Tommy's like, well, I'm too fucked up, like I can't go, I can't do this, basically, like in a very and what I think is like, I do like the character of Tommy a lot. I think this moment is so heartbreaking to see how cruel he is to Ellie, how much his life has fallen apart because of this. I mean, like, just the line delivery and his physical appearance at this point is so...
I mean, it's kind of like one of the few, like, he's Joel's brother moments that we get, that it's like Joel is so bitter and violent so often in the story, and we don't really see Tommy do that much, but, like, here it is.
But we hear it. We hear Tommy can be that way, right? Like, they talk early in the game about how Tommy is just as bad as Joel was, and I think
he's a torturer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the context that comes up in. Oh, I didn't know that Tommy could do something like this. Well, him and Joel did a lot of things before.
Yeah.
You know.
I think this is a really effective, heartbreaking scene, and it leads to what I think is, like, thematically the most resonant parts of this game for me. And we've talked about, like, the way, revenge media in general just lends itself to being viewed through the lens of addiction, whether it's intentional or not. It's just so easy to view revenge stories that way. And I think this game, especially right here, like, obviously Ellie is... We talked about the way she's still going out day after day in Seattle, even though it is, like, having a profoundly negative effect on her. And the way, like, addicts do, speaking from experience, I'm in recovery 4 years as of a week and a half from now. This is the scene of a profound relapse that is, like, shocking and, like, very well done. I think, like, even though I can't say on good authority whether or not... it was written with any thought to addiction at all, I think, like, it lands the beat so hard when Tommy imprints this in her mind, and Ellie ultimately is like, I am going to give up everything for this, to go back out. I'm going to, you know, there's another heartbreaking scene between her and Dina in the kitchen as Ellie has woken up, she's gotten dressed, she's like, I'm going back out there, and Dina's like, how could you do this? Like, we have a family. If you leave, you are not coming back to me. Well, first off, she's like, I don't know if you'll even return. And if you do come back, you're not coming back to me. And Ellie's like, all right, I'm out. And I mean, that is like, that's relapse, man. That is things any person who has struggled or is struggling with addiction and has or had loved ones in their life have, like, dealt with that, have dealt with the willing choice to abandon loved ones for, in the addict's case, a DOC, in this case, brutal murder. But, you know, that's just how video games communicate. And you have had, I can't speak too much to this specific case, but, like, people also have enablers like Tommy in their life that will upend that for their own selfish gain, which is what Tommy's doing here. I never really encountered that. Luckily, I had a really good support system of even people who still did not try to get me to drink. But nevertheless, that I think like it makes this moment, and the Santa Barbara section, which is, like, seen through this lens, just Ellie going through the depths of the relapse, the rock bottom beyond rock bottom, like, really strong for me. And I really, really love them. And it doesn't necessarily overwrite a lot of my issues with the back part of this game we've been talking about, but, like, I think that resonates with me in a way that is, like, so specific and personal that I just, like, fuck with it so hard.
No, it's really, like, I think a lot of the problems I had with this game the first time I played through were due to pacing and not knowing where the story was going and feeling like I was almost done and not being done. And a lot of those were not as much an issue this time, just because I knew I still have 6 hours till the ending or whatever. But this reading of it specifically, Blake, I really I found really, like, it affected how I viewed the ending, just in that, like, this is the part where I think most normal people are going to be angriest at Ellie, you know, like, playing the game, you know, and I don't say normal in regards to not you, I mean,
right.
People on the internet who never lose faith in Ellie, whatever. But, like, you know, I mentioned Annie hollering when she learned that there were 3 hours left of the game. She was also, like, yelling at the screen at this moment, which I think is kind of the reaction, you know, of just, like, what are... it is so obvious that the choice is to not do this. You know, like, I really don't think there's supposed to be any doubt in your mind that, like, maybe Ellie is right to, like, go and keep pursuing Abby. I think the game wants us to be like, nope, wrong decision. And trying to kind of figure out how I felt about Ellie just making the wrong decision without this frame, I just found much more challenging. And I do think that, like, viewing it through the lens of you know, like, addiction and obviously trauma, but, like, feeling like this will be the thing that fixes me, I think is kind of, like, unsaid in Ellie's choice there. And, like, I do think that is a very sad and very effective beat. But the first time I played this game, I was more on the side of just like, I can't believe this is still fucking happening, you know? Which I think also, viewed from the lens of people who haven't experienced addiction, is like probably, you know, it's like it's very easy to be unsympathetic in those moments.
And it, you know, like, I'm not going to sit here and in good faith say this game is not about cycles of violence, blah, blah, blah. Because it is. But I think, like, where I push back is, like, when people seem to think it's only about that. And I can't say, like, Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross were like, hey, do you have any addicts in your life? Or are you in recovery? Let's use those direct experiences. But I think, like, the way it lends itself to that reading, there is more going on to this story than I think just, like, violence is bad. And I kind of hate that often, like, critically, the game is boiled down to just that. Because I think, like, one of the big questions it also asks is not just, is violence bad, is who deserves revenge? Who earns it, you know? And the game seems to, I guess, think Abby. But I think, like, that's one of the things that makes the game's storytelling, like, kind of powerful at some moments, especially in this farmstead section where it's like, fuck. Like, it hit me. That scene with Dina and Ellie in the kitchen fucking gets me every time. It rocks.
You know, I think both things are true, right? Like, I think that part of it, I think why that resonates so well, and I read it the exact same way that you did, right? Like, it is a working through these questions of trauma and, you know, post-traumatic stress, like these things through the kind of language of addiction, and certainly the visual language of addiction, right? Like, the way that this thing is shot, the way that there's this kind of, I don't know, aggressive reservedness on her part, right? Like I can now go do this. There, you know, you were talking about the acting earlier. There's some really strong kind of mocap performance that goes on here. But I also think, like, the connecting piece here, right, is that addiction for the prestige drama is the lingua franca of why do things happen to these characters who have problems, right? Like, this is HBO straight up, right? This is The Wire. You know, this is McNulty's whole deal. You know, specifically, I think the 5th season of that positions, you know, he both is drinking and having issues there, but also the kind of inventing the serial killer plot thing that goes on there. That's entirely processed in this exact same style. And Bullock in Deadwood kind of functions the same way too, even though he is not explicitly an addict in any way, right? They present the reason he does all these things around justice through the language and visual language of addiction, right? So, like, for me, I think you're exactly right. That it's doing that, and it's doing that precisely because this is the tool in the toolbox that they have to go for. I actually wish that I wish they went one step further, right? I wish that there was some sort of actual commitment to the thing here, right? Like, to really thinking a little bit more intently about it, because we see her go into the thing and, like, kind of into the depths of relapse, essentially, but then there's not, I mean, I don't know, we'll get to the very end, but I think actually they should have committed to the bit here, right? Like, I think the extension of grace to Ellie is the big mistake of the film, or not film, sorry, of the game. I think truly that if this is where you're going to go, you need to really commit to it, and I think it would have made the game much stronger.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, though, like, I don't know exactly where this game needs to end to land that better. I think ultimately Ellie's arc of addiction is she will lose everything, which is a cynical view I think a lot of people hold of addicts, is the end goal of your life by your own decisions is you're just going to lose everything. And that's not true. You know, I have a lot of my friends that I had pre-addiction, still have great relationships with my family. I don't have a child, but I have a dog who still loves me. That dog wasn't alive before I got sober. And that, now that I'm thinking about it a little more, like, that is an unfortunate thing this game decides to do, is that, like, and I think it's where the themes of violence butt up against the themes of addiction, where it's like, to tell the violent story, Ellie has to lose everything. But when you think about, like, the addiction themes, that's a pretty problematic and cynical view of addiction and recovery that, like, doesn't serve anyone to tell an addict they can and will lose everything, because they know that if they did that, if anything, they're probably using because they're afraid of that.
But I mean, the thing I think that I would quibble with here is that she doesn't lose everything, right? I mean, she loses all of these, like, standards of middle classness that have been somehow imported into the post-apocalypse, right? But the thing she doesn't lose is grace, right? I mean, in a very classical kind of Christian way, weirdly enough. There is a moment, a literal flashback moment. It's another one of those that we were talking about. It's the inverse of the trauma thing, right? It's the same mechanism, but it is to import the good part of Joel into her to keep her from killing in the very last instance. And I think that's actually a huge error. I think that not losing everything in the addiction sense, but I think the recognition of grace for Ellie should come after making the worst mistake, not before doing it. And I think actually it resolves the whole plot much better to actually kill Abby at the end and leave, you know, the final Seraphite child to go on and live some sort of life, right? And then Ellie has to live with the reality of having done it. I think that is a much more compelling ending. I think you got to commit in some ways.
Yeah, the game, I also feel like, and maybe this is getting away from the conversation a little bit, but I think the game can't fully commit to Ellie as the villain by the end. And it, like, by the end of Abby's section, it is clearly, like, centered on, like, Ellie is the villain of this game, but then once you retake control of Ellie, it wants you to love her again, even though you're going to go on this last brutal rampage. You're going to get the moment of her and Joel. It's the only time in the whole game where you get to have a nice moment between her and Joel, and even then it's, like, pretty contentious. But it can't ever commit to its vision of Ellie. And the ending, it really slips here, and it's like, yeah, but you still love her, right? Like, she's still a little scamp that you've known since she was so young.
It is so. I think we should honestly just kind of skip right to talking about this, because it's like, oh, they're evil greasers in Santa Barbara. We yes.
One played by the famous rapper Logic. Did you know that? When Ellie gets strung upside down, the guy who gets killed by the clicker that's hanging, that's Logic.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go.
Annie said that the main guy looked like someone on Pawn Stars. That was her take.
Yeah.
I think he looks like a John Goodman character.
He is so unique in the visual universe of The Last of Us. He's the only guy who looks like him. It's really weird.
I think he looks like the West Coast Chopper guy.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
I mean, pick a reality show and you're 50-50 on him looking like a guy.
Yeah, he just looks like any rockabilly dude who's ever existed.
Oh, don't do it, man. Don't do it. We don't need to do it. Like, no, can we take 5 minutes? I know that we are pushing time limits here, but can we take 5 minutes to talk about evil greasers? Like, what the fuck? Why even bother?
Let's talk about evil greasers. So we go to Santa Barbara. There is first the scene in Santa Barbara with Abby and Lev, where we learn what we kind of knew before. They're looking for fireflies. Can you believe it? They actually find some, or they find a ham radio that contacts them. It is this interesting thing the game does where there are only two good factions of people in the world, and it's Jackson and the Fireflies. You know, that, like, the WLF have been entirely deconstructed, as have the Seraphites, as have the evil greasers that we will run into soon. But it's like, Abby was kind of disenchanted with the Fireflies at the beginning of this game, but then becomes a believer committed to the cause again by the end of it. I don't know. It is kind of offering hope for the, like, see, there are some good people still in the world, I think, is probably the story purpose of it. I don't really know. It is weird that it's just the Fireflies. I know they couldn't, like, introduce a new faction, but it does make the world feel fairly small, that in this country with essentially no long distance communication other than ham radios and whatever, the only good people doing stuff around are still just Fireflies, that group from the first game who we kind of liked. I don't know. Did you like these parts, Blake?
Aren't they radical
Firefly
terrorists?
stuff?
Aren't they
Well,
terrorists?
I mean,
too? Weren't they blowing up checkpoints?
You know, they were fighting the government.
That's
you know, the fascist government.
I mean,
whatever.
What else?
But
I mean, what else are you gonna do to wrap this up, right? Like, where it's. I don't know if it matters whether I like it or not. It just, the game needs to end and Abby needs somewhere to go. So it's like, oh, why not send her back to the Fireflies? It also, in some ways, resolves Owen's plotline. She is going to at least be someone who gets to live the dream of Owen. I don't know. I didn't really think too much about it.
It is maybe the one time in the game that Abby smiles, which I do think is a nice moment. Is like you see her. It looks so unusual on her face that it looks like the face app smile thing, but like she does, you know, like. Yeah. She is excited to meet the Fireflies, and then of course no good deed goes unpunished. Immediately they are ambushed by these horrible people outside who, Cameron, as you said, there need to be an even worse, you know, in the same way kind of that you had David's group in the first game of like, surprise, they're cannibals. It's like, we need to find just the most irredeemable people in the entire universe of this series to then go and kill with a silent submachine gun.
Turns out slavers. Though, what are they using the slaves for?
Unclear. I truly don't know.
Because it's not like they have like a small farm, but you don't need an army of slaves for that. Like, it's never clear why they are just keeping people captive.
They are just evil. They are just evil people. And so then we switch to Ellie. You've got some more combat sections. You get a silent submachine gun and you start killing these guys. You go up to a big compound. Kind of, I think one of only two places in the game that you can like use the clickers and other infected on the enemies. They in the way that they are so stupid and so evil, just have chained up infected and are taunting them inches away. Cameron, do you feel in a the evil greaser thing that I keep referencing is a Just King Things observation, which is no matter the era, no matter the setting, Stephen King will find a way to have evil greasers in his story. Y'all also talk about on that pod a lot the sense of like evil destroying itself is a very Stephen King moral universe thing, where it's like, hey, at the end of the day, evil's so dumb and bad that it's just going to cause its own destruction. Do you think that these guys standing like 2 inches away from infected people just begging you to shoot the chains is essentially an evil destroys itself fable?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like the evil destroys itself deal is just like central to genre literature, right? Like it is part and parcel of it's the Western too, right? Like the Black Cat is gonna go get a posse together of evil dudes who will betray each other, or they're gonna be incompetent, or they're gonna be too murderous, too ideally murderous, or whatever, right? Whereas like the good cowboy's gonna have like his gang of people who are good, right, and who care about each other and are part of the community, or not asocial, right? Like, and that the same thing happens in fantasy. There's a way of reading the Lord of the Rings that is also a similar thing, and I think that really is partially where Stephen King is pulling it from. So yeah, it's like a big staple. It's just rarely so goofy, right? Like it's so
goofy,
right? It's goofy. I think that's actually my real problem. I think all of this is bad. Like I think everything that is between Ellie showing up, or not really, Abby being kidnapped, and Ellie freeing Abby is all terrible, and it's because it's goofy, right? I feel the same way that Blake does about that boss fight between the two of them, right? Like this is perfunctory. We all know what's going on. It's incredibly boring. I don't need a submachine gun. Like, that's not why I'm playing this game. Certainly, that's not why I'm on the off-ramp for this game, is to, like, Rambo it up, right? Like, this is the Rambo 2 moment, right? Of, like, what's going on?
Oh, this is the Half-Life 2 gravity gun. Like, we did it! You can have one!
But Right. It would be better if we had a gravity gun, right? It would be better if it were so ridiculous, right?
Just give her a bazooka.
Yeah, give her the ability to mind control the infected, right? Like that's an evolution of her immunity. Like, I don't give a shit at this point, right? Whatever. Like it's all wasting time until we get to the actual final fight. And all the stuff at the very end is, mechanistically, there is something so, I don't know, outside of the mental framework or the conceptual framework that these games have ever had for these characters. Like, what happens with Abby essentially being enslaved for weeks, months? I mean, like, there's something going on with a commitment to thinking about that, the emaciation, all of that is way outside of the realm of consideration for the rest of it. That is a thing that would show up in, speaking of things that are rotten, like a Lars von Trier film, right? Like, this is the, like, acceptable art cinema. Oh shit, our protagonist has had truly the worst possible shit happen to them, and now you're witnessing it from the outside, right? And that's what's about to happen with the fight that we're talking about too, right? That is other than Dina's head being slammed into the ground, it is the most excessive bit of violence that we get in the whole game, while also weirdly enough being like Metal Gear Solid 4. And that's partially why my distrust of not committing to the end, exists, right? Is that you're really pulling on ideas here that are out of the revenge genre. Blake, you were referring to that earlier, right? Like, this is out of the, like the park, mindset, right? The old boy universe, right? Of thinking about things that revenge and the vagaries of human life outside of your very particular narrative vision of yourself will cause all kinds of horrible things to happen. And when you decide to execute on revenge, you are making a deeply individual choice that has consequences. And the game, in the last instance, looks right into the headlights of that moment and says, no, I won't. No, I won't make any bad decisions, like truly bad decisions. I'll be good in my last moment. And I just distrust that move so much.
There is a moment before you get to the camp that the first time I was playing, Ellie gets caught in a trap. She smashes into a tree. She gets impaled by like a branch sticking out. And I did have a moment where I was like, what if this is Ellie's end? Like, what if she just dies here and this is how the game ends, which would be a ballsy way to end a game. So you have this whole sequence. There is a strange moment that, again, I was like, what is this? What are they doing here? Where Ellie is fighting one of the biker gang in like next to a prison cell, kicks the guard back up against the prison cell, and all of the people that they've been keeping as slaves like kill the guard and then come out. And it seems like they might thank Ellie, but then they see that Ellie is bit, and so they essentially have like a very tense standoff where they're just pointing guns at each other, and then they run away. And it's just another thing that's like, the game's doing a prison break now? Like, and Ellie doesn't give a shit about it, and the game doesn't really give a shit about it. It kind of just seems like a way to set the compound on fire as a backdrop for your last fight. But it is just another thing where it's like, thematically, this could be something, but I don't think the game has anything that it's doing with it other than what's weird. Okay. What is weird about this last section is there are many things that seem like it is unequivocally good that Ellie came to Santa Barbara. That not only did she kill all these, the evil greasers and let the people out of this slavery prison, Abby would have died if Ellie did not come down, which I have no idea if that is doing anything intentionally or is just a contrivance, because if it is intentional, what could you possibly make out of it? Like, I don't know. But she finds Abby, and she saves her before demanding that they fight to the death.
They never have a real confrontation. They have violent confrontations, but the two never talk to each other. Even in this moment where the player would probably expect it and want it most, they still just don't talk. They're like, which I don't know. I kind of like the idea that it's like, hey, we both know why I'm here, so let's just do it. But there's never like a conversation really, like a real conversation between Abby and Ellie, which I think is cool because other games, like we've been referencing Kojima stuff. Other games, we would have to have an hour-long chat between these two, and it would go on forever. I do kind of like them just always showing up and be like, all right, let's fucking duke it out. Kind of like the chicken and Peter Griffin and Family Guy, honestly.
That's right. That's exactly what it says. Yeah, it is. I mean, we talked about the kind of legacy of Joel on how Ellie understands relationships. And this does kind of seem like one where it's just like Joel is the most important person in her life, and nothing about him has given her the emotional capability to like have a real conversation with someone who hurt her, and it's like that is kind of undercut by the thing that happens in the middle of this fight with Joel. But I do think that it is, the read of just like Ellie does not know how to deal with the things that she's feeling in any way other than violence, because she has never had like a figure that loved her that like showed her how to do that. That the most formative figure in her life was this man who only knew how to deal with things through violence, and then he was violently taken from her, and like she just doesn't have the vocabulary to do anything except that.
So Abby and Ellie fight.
Oh wait, no, Cameron, were you about to say something?
Just one really quick thing. What's fascinating about that to me is, there's The Last of Us Part 1, what is now The Last of Us Part 1, The Last of Us Part 2. There is also the Faith Aaron Hicks and Druckmann authored American Dreams prequel, which is a comic book, which is canonical. It is the pre-story of Ellie from The Thing. And then we also have the DLC, that's in there that is now part of Part 1, but was separate. And what's so interesting to me is that in this, Blake, I think is also going back, because I have a similar kind of like when these games get reduced down to its cycles of violence, I also am like, well, there's a lot of weird stuff in here that doesn't fit necessarily with that. And this is another part of it, is that actually within the official documentation of all the things that have been seen in these games, Ellie has had lots of models for different forms of relationship and has had people who have cared about her. We get a little bit about her mother. We get a long extended stuff about Marlene, both in the actual game, we see someone, I'm blanking on her name, the other smuggler with Joel, Tess, right? She sacrifices her life for Ellie. We get the two brothers, right, who have a deep connection to one another, and that's what happens there is horrifying. And then we get the entirety of Abby's crew, who are like people who deeply care about one another, won't betray one another, even as someone Michael Myers like picks them off one by one, right? Like in fact, these are games that and the narrative universe is incredibly capacious for ways of thinking about relationships, and thinking about ways that humans interact with one another. And the game has to purposefully pair all that off, right? What we don't ever get is Ellie having a flashback to the two brothers, right? We don't ever have her flashing back to Tess. And that's a directorial decision, right? That is a narrative decision. In our brains, as players, we have all that experience. I have my 60 hours or so of the Last of Us narrative, and if I wrote it all down in bullet point form, that does not comport to what the game cinematically and what the game kind of mechanically is telling me. And that, to me, is the really interesting inflection here, right? It is bigger than we're given. Last
week, we had Julie Muncie on the show, who wrote her review was essentially the Last of Us 2 is the ultimate daughter game. That we've had so many dad games, and this is a daughter game. And part of being the daughter game is like the most and maybe the only important relationship is with the father. That like Joel is absent for almost all of this game, and yet looms over it larger than any other figure in Ellie's life.
Yep. I mean, everyone else from the first game doesn't exist, right? Just non-existent.
All right, Blake. Tekken 8. Ellie versus Abby.
Abby and Ellie fight. It's a knockout, beatdown brawl. It's I don't know if Noah Noah talked in his video about how Death Stranding spoofed this type of thing a year before. I don't fully know if that moment in Death Stranding was as smart as that, but I do think it is a very comparable moment of just like...
I mean, I think the moment in Death Stranding is intentionally stupid, and this feels unintentionally stupid.
Right. I just don't necessarily think that moment in Death Stranding was a big bit of satire on stuff in games like this, because Uncharted 4 did a similar thing. Like, the games have done these dumbass fights. It sucks, frankly. Abby bites off a few of Ellie's fingers so that Ellie can't play guitar anymore, and everyone loves that scene where she fucks up the Pearl Jam song. It's like, all right, whatever.
God, it's a Pearl Jam song.
Yeah.
Just of all
I can fuck up a Pearl Jam song too, just for the record.
That actually quite, and I mean this sincerely, when I started the game again and had the flash of all the Pearl Jam significance, I found it embarrassing, literally. I find it so, as the youth say these days, cringe, right? Like the commitment to that for no reason, and they had to like invent timeline reasons why Joel would know this song.
Yes.
Right? It's like, why not pick literally anything else?
I like Pearl Jam just fine. I think they're a good band. They got some good ass songs. But like, there's definitely a dad level fan of Pearl Jam that Neil Druckmann's committing to here that is very annoying.
Right. I like Pearl Jam fine too, but not this song. The songs that they made 20 years before the song, which are American classics, right?
The song that is just, what if we said all the themes of the game in our chorus? Just one after another.
So I think here at this fight, in my head, there are two ways to end this section that might both be better. One is Ellie just kills Abby. Like, I don't know, maybe kills Lev, but probably doesn't kill Lev. And that's the end. The other one that I'm kind of into, that ends the same without the fight, is they get to the boat, and that's when Ellie gives up. And, like, you still get the sitting in the ocean thing, which I think is a great shot. I think, like, there is a way to end this game, even maybe with the flashback, without the fight, where they get to the boat, you can see Ellie, like, wrestling with it, and then, I don't know, probably says nothing to her, and then just sits down, and Abby goes off. I think the fight is very dumb and goofy, and there's so many ways.
It's just so gamey.
Yeah, there's so many ways you can take this ending. If you want to commit to Ellie having a change of heart, like, there's a way to do it without her having to inflict and receive violence. That is probably more effective and interesting, of her just like silently giving up on it and sitting down. But as it is, you have to sit through this obnoxious fight that's just feels bad because, like, I mean, I assume it's the point, but like, Abby is starving to death, so you're just beating a starving woman as a child is in the boat who is clearly on death's door. Like, it feels just like needlessly.
I do think,
it feels needlessly cruel for the moment that immediately follows it, where Ellie shows grace. And it's like, so what was the point of the cruelty? Either commit to the cruelty and kill Abby, or don't try to do it both ways.
Yeah, do you think you're supposed to feel ashamed?
A change or ashamed?
Oh, ashamed. Because when playing it, right, and even rewatching just the final bit of it, 30 minutes before we recorded this, I had this distinct, and looking back at my notes too, I had this really distinct feeling of shame. And I think that's I think you're supposed to, but then it clearly is not communicated to huge portions of the fan base, and like, whatever, I can't control for that. Neither can Neil Druckmann or Haley Gross or anyone else, right? But it seems like if you can play this moment and not feel shame, they shouldn't have bothered, right? Like, I'm in the same spot as you are, Blake. Like, both of those strategies to me that you just lined out are beautiful ways of ending this game, and rather than the thing. But Jacob, sorry,
I think when many of the reviews of this game were kind of on the like, Jesus, I get it, it's killing people is bad, violence is bad, which I think is an oversimplification of what the game is saying. But I do think that this scene is so knockdown, drag out for explicitly that point, which is not a point that I need to be taught any further personally. Like, I do think that it is maybe the most explicitly villainous Ellie is, other than like pulling Nora down into the infected hospital or whatever, but like holding the knife to Lev is so obviously fucking just like a super villain move that is, it is like, there is no way that you can be proud of your protagonist when she is doing this. I think the fact that Abby is starving is very intentional, and it's like, yeah, it feels bad, and it's just like, I don't need it. 30 hours into the game, I don't need this much misery to convince me that the violence is bad, which I do think in this case, it's kind of all that it's doing. And then there is this flashback. We see lovely Joel haloed by a porch light in the same way that she's seen Joel's dying face, in flashbacks before. But then, well, I guess so she just gets the flash of it. She lets Abby and Lev go. And then it's back at the farmhouse that you get the full scene. We didn't talk about we're going way long. There is that scene where Ellie and Abby kiss, or not Ellie and Abby. Ellie and Dina kiss.
Hold on.
If you beat it in 5 hours, you get the Ellie Abby kiss scene. No, the Abby and Dina kiss. Ellie and Dina. Jesus, the names in this game are messing me up. Okay, so there is the scene that Ellie and Dina kiss in the dance, which was part of a big E3 demo. Happens at almost the very end of the game. I think, very strategically positioned, so you feel so bad about Ellie leaving Dina. It's like their highest moment and then their lowest moment. This is kind of a similar thing in that it is at Ellie's lowest moment that she remembers the kind side of Joel, and their conversation is essentially them finally talking in a real way about Joel's decision. Joel says, I would have done it all exactly the same, which I think is an insane thing to say, but that is how he feels, and he cannot grapple with the fact that he took agency away from Ellie. But, I think more importantly to Ellie's motivations, she says, I don't think I can ever forgive you, but I would like to try. And that's kind of the point of the scene, and I think extension of grace is a very good way of phrasing it, because I think it is supposed to bring Ellie to the most unsympathetic character and then give her back a bit of sympathy, I guess, in that it is her, the death of Joel was extra painful because they had decided to work on their relationship again, which is just, it is so strange. And the first time I played through the game, I think I just kind of took it as okay, here's the reveal. It's Joel's death is even sadder than we thought. But the narrative construction of a flashback is chosen by the writers. It is not, this is the only time Ellie has remembered this scene is right now. But it feels like a twist to reveal that she was more sympathetic than we thought. But it certainly doesn't change how I feel about anything that she did in the game. I'm not oh, she was right to go on her, completely depraved revenge quest. And so I don't... Noah has a reading on this that I will talk about at the end, but I'm curious how y'all read the scene and kind of its placement in the story, because this time I just found it very, confusing. I kind of didn't get it.
Oh, you can say I have nothing. I think that it's pointless. I think that it would have been better for it to be that micro flash that we get just of him on the porch. She's killing Abby and has her head underwater and everything, and we get the flash and then she lets her up, right? I think it would be better. I think it would be better to have that image contextless, that there's some image of Joel in his best moment, right? Of sitting on the porch, haloed by the light, as you said, right? With the guitar, the thing that's resonant of him. There's something about what is good in him that she remembers that makes this rational. I just trust the audience to figure, if you accept what's occurring here, I think everyone gets it. I don't think there's any ambiguity. And I think it's a big, cartoon Krusty the Clown hammer, bonking us on the old noodle here, being actually, did you know that this image was full of meaning? And the meaning was he was a good guy? By the way, we, overwhelmingly we accept that he's a good guy, right? He's a conflicted man. He did bad stuff, whatever. But it's not as if we've been running through this whole thing being who was wrong about his relationship with Ellie? It was Joel, right? The game, both games have it stacked in Joel's favor to the point where the dominant read of the first game remains, Joel was right to do what he did, right? However I feel about that, however people do a little skimming of people talking about it both critically and non-critically, and you're going to find most people saying, yeah, that was right. So I think it's just a big old bonk on the head. I think it's pointless. I think it's also confusing. It doesn't, it's not Memento, right? Where we like get a piece of information that goes, oh my God, it changes the last hour of my life is different. She should never have killed those greasers, right? It's none of that. So I think it is, again, I think all of this is downstream from things that feel right to show up on HBO. And I think this is a thing that is like some Westworld shit, right? Mechanistically, it almost is exactly Westworld Season 1 in terms of a piece of information that should give you more context for what you saw before, except it doesn't do that, right? But the form of it, right? The editing of it, where it shows up and how, the tonal change of it, right? It's idyllic, it's all the way back. That's all stuff that is in the script of a Westworld episode, but just doesn't land here.
So this scene popped up, and Jacob, first off, let me agree with you that him saying I'd do it all over again, insane thing to say after everything you've put Ellie through. But I became 19 years old again watching this. I'm such a fucking mark, dude. The first Last of Us came out when I was 19, and I've written since then, for Game Informer, you can go find it, about how my opinion on the first Last of Us has changed pretty dramatically in a way that bumps me out. Like, I really wish I would not have replayed that game. But you know what? The game still, just like because of when I played it and just how it hit me at the time, being very young, I do like these characters a lot. They hold a big place in my heart. And this is like the only moment in this game where Joel and Ellie have a good moment with each other. And even then, it's contentious, but like it is a moment of building a bridge where once there was, ashes. And I was just such a fucking mark for this moment, dude. It got me so good. I was like, brain off, head empty. I am just emotional right now. And
you got fan serviced. They brought him back.
I got fan service, dude. And like, I'm just gonna be a Last of Us fan forever. And
look, we gotta be honest about that, because Jacob, you said this earlier, but I had the same feeling of when the start menu changes. I didn't have any of that for what you just talked about, Blake. Like, there's nothing there. And also, I had written, by the time this game came out, I'd replayed that first game so many times that if there was an allure to it for me at some point, it had been obliterated by just like the rote repetition. But that start menu did do the same thing for me of like, fuck, they made it, right? You know what I mean? Like this emaciated, Abby truly is just, not to keep going back to like weird Christian metaphors, right? But she nearly Jobian in terms of like just shit that trickles downhill, and begins rolling downhill to just ruin her life, including being enslaved for an innumerable amount of time. And they made it probably like that to me. I was like, oh, they got me. Damn it.
Yep.
And look, that's the power of the image too, right? That's just one that is a start menu change, right?
Look, it's sunrise. It's just looking at a sunrise and you're like, this has meaning to me.
Right. And like, that's video. If there's a power of the medium, it's that an option. It's like, if it's 2001. You're watching the Gladiator DVD. After it finishes, it goes back and he's like there idyllically with his family who had been slayed, in this like heaven space. And you'd be like, wow, yeah, they did it,
Dude, here's the thing. Melodrama, when things are on the nose,
it works.
I'm putting it on my own nose. I'm like, let me have it, dude.
Melodrama is 3,000 years old, and the reason it's 3,000 years old is it fucking works. Like,
yeah, dude.
It's an efficient form.
Absolutely. This scene between Joel and Ellie, it took me back to the summer of 2013, 19 years old in my parents' basement, and I was like, I just fucking love him so much. I would have done the same thing. I had done the same damn thing, Ellie. And she'd be like, you literally missed the point of both games then.
You are not immune to propaganda.
Yeah. She's like, were you paying attention to either game, Blake? I was like, doesn't matter. I would do the same thing all over again.
So Noah's read on this scene, which I think is a very interesting one, is not what I got emotionally, but I just like his reading of it, is the conversation where Ellie says, I don't know if I can forgive you for that, but I'm going to try. Noah says that like he's like, Ellie now realizes, or we now realize as Ellie, that like it would be easy for her to forgive Joel because she has done so much worse than him. You know, that like her like emotional journey to forgive Joel has essentially been replaced with the emotional journey that she is beginning, maybe, which is like how to live with herself. Which I think is, you know, like, I don't know. I don't like the idea that the rest of Ellie's life is defined by Joel. I find that a very kind of disappointing ending. And so I do think that Ellie's new journey, having like the figure of Joel in her mind replaced with the figure of herself who has done monstrous things and needs to figure out a way to like live, is an interesting one, but it's really not a reading that I had when playing it, and so, you know, I want to bring it up because I found it poetic, but I did not find it. It wasn't there for me emotionally when I encountered the scene.
That I mean that's interesting, but that is a level of introspection on the part of a character that never happens in the 60 hours of both of these games. Like, just truly, like, no character has that rich of an internal life, right? That it would be momentous for our understanding of how these games work if that were like the read of that thing. I mean, I think that's a beautiful way of interpreting it. But I think that's wrong. I don't agree with that. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you got to put your cards on the table. I think, you know, Noah and I don't always agree about stuff, and this is a moment where that is occurring. I think that is way too charitable to the character, and I really wonder how does he fit that with the next scene with the big visual metaphor of a lack in one's life that cannot be repaired, and so then therefore must be.
You know, I think I'm not sure I'd be putting words in his mouth here, but I think the idea would be like from the bottom of the barrel you can go up. You know, that now that everything of that life has been essentially wiped away, and so what her quest that we will not accompany her on is like how to live now without.
You were literally just telling me Tyler Durden words. Like, you were actually literally telling me the Tyler Durden monologue from Fight Club right now.
Why do we know what a bidet is? Oh no, he says duvet,
a duvet.
not bidet.
Tyler Durden knows all about a bidet. It's the duvet that's the issue.
Jacob, how many Fight Club posters do you have in your college dorm?
More than 2. This has been revealed on a Something Rotten previous. Okay, so anyway, Ellie gets back to the house. It's empty. She can't play the Pearl Jam song. Oh gosh, the metaphor, what revenge reaps upon the person seeking it. She walks out the door. There is just one thing that I want to talk about in this scene, which is that there is a really interesting camera movement. And this is not a game that I think does things with the camera very often. I think almost entirely it is, the cinematography is supposed to be kind of invisible, like it's never really making a statement. But there's just the scene at the end where Ellie leaves the room where she's playing guitar, and the camera stays still for a long time and then does like a very slow push up to the window to watch her walking away. And it is noticeable enough that I feel like it is the game separating us from her in a way that feels kind of intentional. That like for so much of the game, it is just the camera is following Ellie exactly. They are, for all intents and purposes, the same. You know, that how we perceive Ellie is how she perceives the world. And this being kind of this invisible third party holding the camera feels almost like an intentional detachment from that, which is not something that I remembered from my first time, but I found really just like interesting, and the game doesn't do that much with its camera work, and so I found it notable.
I think you're probably right. I also think it's a what's the word I'm fucking looking for? A callback to the start menu of the first game.
Yeah, that's
for sure.
What I think too. I'm actually like trying to check to make sure but that's also the which actually like recast the first game, right? So is the old decayed windowsill from the start menu of the first game, is that actually the far future? Like, is that image, you know, the future of all these people after they are dead? Which is like, I don't know.
But that is interesting. Jacob, I noticed that camera movement as well, and only one other time in the game did I notice the camera doing something cool. and it didn't seem really like thematically.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't seem like there was any thematic reasoning. Just like the way they moved the camera through an action moment was really neat.
Yeah,
there's it's like a front shot of Abby and Lev running that's very good through multiple rooms. Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah,
I know.
cool.
Yeah, I noticed that moment as well too. But I just thought it was trying to kind of position itself in a way to call back the original start menu.
I think that is also certainly true. Okay, at the end of this record length Something Rotten, Cameron, I want to ask you, we talked about your article on The Last of Us 1 being quote unquote the greatest story ever told in video games. What is The Last of Us 2 in kind of its cultural context? Because it is hard for me to figure out the effect that this game is having on conversations about stories in the same way that it felt very obvious what the first one's effect was. Have you seen any, like, do you have an answer to that?
I don't think I do. And in the same way that I wouldn't have an answer for that about the first one, you know, the Last of Us 1 comes out in a cluster of things that are all, you know, really defining what is the AAA narrative game. You know, you mentioned BioShock Infinite earlier, right? And I think that from The Last of Us to BioShock Infinite, there's this kind of defining role. I don't know. I truly don't know. I mean, I think that probably if you were to ask me, like, what is the defining narrative maneuver of this moment that it came out, it wouldn't be here. It would be God of War. You know, would be the actual game that's like kind of defining what's going on. I mean, here there's it for pacing reasons. The first game, love it or hate it, whatever, it has an undeniable forward driving pace. And you can say to people, hey, remember winter, remember fall, remember summer, and people know what you're talking about, which is like kind of wild to think about. You told me for this episode, Jacob, you were like, yeah, we're doing day 3 of Abby through the end of the game. And I was like, what happened in day 3, right? Like there's a way that this game, it has a compelling narrative framework to it. I think people who are invested in the game are invested in the story. But I don't think it is like defining to a sector of games in the way the previous game is. And part of that has to do with the fact that overwhelmingly, you know, if we're talking about human beings who are engaging with narrative experiences, this is not what they're engaging with, right? They're engaging with gotcha games on their phone and these long form kind of serialized narratives that are ongoing forever, or it's Destiny 2 and Fortnite, right? Both of which are live service games that are redefining what, you know, in terms of en masse human beings, what are we doing in our games? Those are just different narrative frameworks, like, you know, and they're not better or worse or whatever, but they are different. And you really can't, someone who's a narrative designer, director, you know, you can tell me I'm wrong here, but I think it's very hard to be in that universe of things and then look at The Last of Us Part 2 and then extract beats that are helpful or useful for you, right? So I think that, you know, this is the waning moment. You know, things might change economically, but I think we're in the waning moment of the prestige narrative game. You know, certainly this style of it. You know, and there are only so many, not just blockbusters, but there's only so many there's only so many Oppenheimers that can happen, right? There's only so many Nolan-esque, massive budgeted, singular, trusting the gut of this person with their massive team of people, right? And there's only, in the industry, there's only room for so many Neil Druckmanns, right? Like, there's only on the calendar so much room for The Last of Us, and that the room on that calendar 10 years ago there was room for 7 The Last of Us, right? I mean, even Assassin's Creed, you know, this is always on my brain all the time, but Assassin's Creed takes years off now, right? Not just a year, but like a couple years, right? Between Valhalla and the new one, I think we've had two full holiday seasons. So I think the part of the answer to that is The Last of Us Part 1, what is now Part 1, matters so much as the greatest story, you know, in games, big quotation marks, because it was in the right place at the right time, pulling on the right strings to have the right kind of impact. And I think at this moment, for this type of game, you know, game development cycles are so long, we have really rocketed into the auteur moment, and that's really changing the expectation. And the economics are just different, right? Like, the industry at this moment is more consolidated than it has been probably in my lifetime. right? Like really and truly. And so the question really is that how much is this going to define the Sony universe approach versus the billions and billions of dollars of the Activision Microsoft, conglomerate, whatever, the Wayland Yutani that is forming over there, and what they decide that narrative games are going to look like in the future. Because look, that's the reality of it. We are downstream from mass economic movement, and what we perceive of as good or artful or beautiful or whatever is it's not in us entirely, right? That is structured, it's social, it has to do with what our media environment looks like, and hard to fight $1 billion. So that's all to say, like, I don't know. It is notable to me that I can't think of any narrative design talk that I've watched or YouTube video from someone professionally in the field, or even a personal conversation I've had with people who do that work. I can't think of anyone who has mentioned this game. Not positive, not negative, period. And I talk to a lot of people, Blake, you do too. And I don't know, what that looks like on your side, but that's weird and notable. Whereas for a decade, you could not get rid of The Last of Us. People still talk about it. I hear it mentioned today way more than The Last of Us Part 2 still. So, yeah.
So what is the greatest story in a video game?
Oh, it's The Last of Us Part 1. Oh, and also it's the underwater level of Super Mario Brothers.
I agree. It's Yakuza 0.
Yeah.
It's Yakuza 0 for sure.
Well, that brings us to the end of this mammoth series on The Last of Us Part 2, the playthrough, at least. Blake and I will be returning both with a very special exclusive Nebula episode and a Q&A episode where we'll certainly talk about this being a AAA rotten game and all those other things that people want to know about. Cameron, I listened to perhaps more separate podcasts with you on it than any other individual person. Do you want to plug those podcasts and also other things that you're working on that people would like to know about?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I could bloat this episode by a full hour by doing the thing I'm doing.
That's the range touched effect.
It truly is. I'm my apologies and/or got him. So over at rangedtouch.com or Ranged Touch on any given social media platform, you can find the stuff. It's me and Michael Lutz and Danny and now Austin Walker on our new show, Shelved by Genre. You can listen to me and Michael on Just King Things, who are reading all of Stephen King in publication order. You don't need to read the books to have a good time listening to it. You can check it out. Shelved by Genre is our new show that is delving into genre literature in a big general sense. We're starting with Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, which is like a big, famously complicated and weird, far future, medieval kind of story. It's really odd. It's really hard. It's a science fantasy, which is kind of the genre label for it. It's weird. In the future, we'll be doing William Gibson's The Sprawl trilogy. I know we're going to be doing Earthsea, the Le Guin novels. So it's really just genre broadly. And right now, that's multiple episodes per book. But at some point, that might get a little bit faster depending on how long the books are. We do a bunch of other stuff there as well. We make YouTube videos. My book, The World is Born from Zero, is out now. I think you can buy it for $22 in paperback. I strongly encourage you to do so. It's about science fiction video games. And the use of science fiction in games and how video games themselves are inherently science fictional, that they pull speculation out of us and that they do stuff with us as far as how we speculate about the world. It's an academic book, but I think it's readable by people who don't do academic stuff. That was the goal. I hope that's the case, but it's got chapters on The Last of Us Part 1 and 2, Valhalla, some climate change games, A Hand with Many Fingers, maybe another one that I'm blanking on. Anyway, so that's the book. I'm working on a book on Assassin's Creed, on the whole franchise, and I've also got the beginning of a project on Magic the Gathering going. So if you want to read me doing those things over the next couple years, there's going to be a lot of that stuff.
Awesome. Well, for Blake Hester, my name is Jacob Geller. This has been Something Rotten on The Last of Us Part 2. We finally did it, everyone. We are done with The Last of Us Part 2. And I don't know what I'm going to do with 900 hours a week that I now don't have to spend playing this game.
Jacob, here's the thing. Something Rotten never ends. You got to start playing the next season like today.
And I'm going to do so almost immediately. See you there, everyone.
Bye.